Welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Seminar. I'm Brendan Meinhardt.
I'm Grant Meinhardt. In these sessions today, you'll hear from industry experts, from weather to COVID-19 to Daryl Holiday is going to give market updates, just kind of get more in depth on your guys' business.
As part of the next generation here at KanEquip, Grant and I'd like to welcome you into our dealerships. We also believe that education is an important role in what we do here at KanEquip. We feel like sponsoring these events can give you insight into a changing ag world.
We'd like to invite you into any one of our 14 locations across Kansas and one in Nebraska. This is a relationship business and one of the best businesses we can be in today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Virtual Seminar. I'm Greg Akagi, Farm Director with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Ag Network in Topeka. Now, we normally hold 4 Farm Profit programs during the months of February and March, but the COVID-19 pandemic has changed many plans for us and indeed for all of you. When 2021 rolled around, we started discussing what we wanted to do this year. We wanted to put on a Farm Profit Seminar, but the question is, in what way? Well, here we are. Over the next couple of hours, you'll hear about familiar topics from familiar faces as well. You'll hear about what we may see with the weather through the spring and into the summer months. We'll also look back at the year 2020 with regards to how agriculture is looking from a financial perspective and what may be on the horizon. We will also get a market outlook as well. This year, we'll also get an update on the happenings in the Kansas legislature from the chairs of the Kansas House and Senate Agriculture Committees. But before we go further, this year's Farm Profit Virtual Seminar is presented by KanEquip, your local New Holland and Case IH dealer. You heard from them earlier, and we'll hear from them throughout the program. So as we get things started, we do that by getting an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine distribution from the top official at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. KDHE Secretary Dr. Lee Norman was appointed by Governor Laura Kelly. He's also a colonel in the Kansas Army National Guard, stationed at Joint Forces Headquarters, Topeka. As the state surgeon of Kansas, he guides medical troop sustainment and training, health services support, force health protection, and biosecurity, and serves as an advisor and a liaison to the Kansas Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. He is a biothreat and pandemic illness advisor to the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center. And tonight, Dr. Norman will give an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine distribution. Would you please welcome KDHE Secretary Dr. Lee Norman.
And welcome to the virtual Farm Profit Seminar. My name is Dr. Lee Norman, and I'm the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I'm also the State Health Officer of the state of Kansas, which means that I involve myself with all of the various health aspects that we need to pay attention to in the state of Kansas. What I wanted to do today is to give you a brief update on COVID-19. I recognize that we're well into this pandemic, but I do want to go back and revisit a little bit kind of where we come from. Where are we today? How have we gotten here? Let's start off with something as basic as the name COVID-19. Where that came from was coronavirus disease, and it originated was discovered originally at the end of 2019. So that's how the CDC came up with COVID-19. Where it originated is probably in Asia, probably in China, spread very rapidly, as you know. There's a great deal of discussion and finger pointing and the like, but in reality, COVID-19 and coronavirus infections are not new to mankind. The SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, that you may remember in 2003 and 2004, was a coronavirus. You may know that in the Middle East, and I was deployed in the Middle East in 2017 and 18, saw firsthand MERS, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, also a very lethal form of the coronavirus. But this one was brand new, the one that came to the United States ultimately. The coronavirus, by the way, we are familiar with ourselves. It causes a common cold. But it's really, really important that people understand that COVID-19 is not a cold, it's not just influenza, and rather it is a very severe illness that, as you know, has affected every single county in Kansas. There's been deaths in every single one of the 105 counties in Kansas. To that point, how are we doing in the numbers compared to Kansas, comparing Kansas to other states? We are now at greater than 300,000 cases identified so far. And keep in mind, we have 3 million or so people in the state of Kansas. That's 1 out of every 10 people that have tested positive for the COVID-19. I'm sure that number is low, by the way, because I'm sure there's been people that have been ill without presenting for that. We've had nearly 5,000 deaths, 4,955 deaths, and we've had, again, deaths in every county. So when did it come to Kansas? About a year ago, a little over that. We had our first case as an older person who had been traveling, and then the first death was a nursing home patient, which, as you probably remember now, has become very common before the vaccine arrived. So who is at risk? Initially, it was the older people, particularly living in congregate settings like skilled nursing facilities, assisted living, and the like. People with underlying medical illnesses at much higher risk, and people that are non-white race, particularly the Hispanic Latinos. People tend to get it more often, but don't have as severe of outcome. African Americans are not only at a risk of acquiring it, but have the highest mortality rate from it. How does it spread? Well, there's been a lot of conversation about this and controversy, quite honestly. You'll remember early on there was concerns that masks work, masks don't work, surfaces, you can't touch anything. What we've learned in these last 14 months or so have been that it's an airborne virus. It spreads just like influenza, like cold viruses, etc. And it's really important to protect yourself from people who are coughing, sneezing, and the like, which goes on when people are gathering in numbers. What are the symptoms of COVID-19? It really runs the gamut, and which makes it difficult because the people can be completely without symptoms and still test positive, and they can spread the illness without ever having any symptoms themselves. That's why this disease has been so difficult to manage, is because asymptomatic people, particularly young people, will be infected with it, feel almost nothing or barely any illness symptoms, and yet they can spread the virus. A great example of that would be a college campus, for example, young people gathering in large numbers. Clinical symptoms. This is a peculiar illness. You've heard about it, that people lose their sense of smell, sense of taste. That's not 100% of the times by any means, but that's really unusual. I've been a family doctor for over 40 years, and there are other illnesses that can cause that, but it's really unusual, somewhat unique to this illness. Cough, muscle aches, headache, the kind of things you feel, fever, that much like when you've had influenza in the past. How do you test for it? There's a number of tests that we do, but mostly they involve measuring a substance, the virus, the genetic material of the virus is called a PCR, a polymerase chain reaction, long word, but meaning swabs that go into the nose to gather up some of the material there and test it to see if the genetic material of the virus is in there. It can also be done in the saliva. We're getting more and more testing capabilities and many different kinds of test methods all the time. And it's getting a whole lot easier, quite honestly. We test also for what's called antigen, which is the rapid test. One of the drawbacks early on was that we didn't have enough testing platforms, we didn't have enough testing materials, and it took days to get the results back. People during that period of time were quite likely to spread it to loved ones and others. Now there's literally point of care bedside tests and even home testing that is now becoming available. I'm sure you've seen or heard of the home pregnancy tests that can be done. This is where we're heading with the COVID-19 testing, to have more testing more broadly available, and for rapid turnaround, because rapid turnaround is important. And get a paper and pencil and write this down, because I think you'll find it to be very helpful. Should you want to be tested for it, it can be done for free in the state of Kansas. And you go to kdheks.gov/coronavirus. That's kdheks.gov/coronavirus. And you click on it, put in your zip code, and it'll show you where some of the testing sites are available. When do we recommend testing? Well, when you're symptomatic, certainly. And if you're symptomatic with COVID-19, you will test positive for it. It has a very accurate, very low, what we call false negative test rate. False negative meaning you have the illness, but it tests negative for some reason. Very low likelihood of that. So get tested anytime you're symptomatic. Also, if you're going to go someplace, we encourage people to know before you go. In other words, you are going to go visit grandma, for example, or you're a college student your college student kids, for example, are coming back home after the end of the school year. You don't want them to bring it back home. Or if they come home, they at least can be made aware. Get tested. Be tested before you go to grandma's house. And again, it's free in the state of Kansas, and really, really helpful to know the status of whether you have it or not, particularly when you're coming back from traveling or going to leave, et cetera. Treatments. How do you treat COVID-19? Well, you get a strep throat or something like that, or a bacterial pneumonia. You go to the doctor and you get an antibiotic. There's no antibiotic for COVID-19. It's a virus. Now, there are lots of things that are being tested and trialed at this point, but there's not. We do have antibodies. When you get infected with a virus or bacteria thing, your body makes these proteins that latch onto and neutralize the virus. We have those antibodies that come in that can be administered either intramuscularly or intravenously. And if a person's in the first few days of an illness, those can markedly improve their likelihood of not becoming hospitalized or dying from the illness. If a person requires hospitalization, additionally, they'll get oxygen because they usually are running low on oxygen, general care, ventilators. Sometimes they have respiratory failure. But again, 5,000 people have perished from this in the state of Kansas so far, and about 5,000 people have died from the illness, so something to take very seriously. Public health measures, avoid crowded spaces, wear masks when you're inside and with people. When you're outside, work in the fields or that kind of thing, you don't need to wear a mask. But when you get inside into any gatherings, it's important to do that. Okay, let's talk about the most exciting thing, which is vaccines. Vaccines are what's going to stop this illness. How is it that a pandemic like this, or you can think back in the Middle Ages with plague, and how is it that they stop? And they stop one of two ways. Either they run out of enough people to infect because they become immune to it, or people die off, or in this case, they get a vaccine. And the vaccine we have now, we have 3 of them, are very, very effective for this. So one of my take-home messages is obviously get vaccinated. The vaccines are available at local health departments, pharmacies, hospitals, and clinics. You can go to a really slick website, vaccinefinder.org, one word, vaccinefinder.org, put in your zip code, and because we have a lot of vaccine in the state of Kansas now. You remember, we were short on vaccine. That's not the situation now. There's still a few areas of the state that don't have everything they need, but we're catching up. There's 3 kinds: Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been put on pause by the CDC and FDA because some people have gotten clotting disorders from it, but it's only 6 people out of 6.8 million. That's an incredibly small number. 1 out of 5 hospitalized people with the illness have clotting disorders. You'd rather have the vaccines because that's a very small risk We haven't seen that at all with the Pfizer and Moderna. If you're nervous about the Johnson & Johnson, go get the Pfizer or Moderna. In Kansas, we've given 1.82 million doses. Over 1 million people have received the first dose, and about 700,000 are fully immunized, so we're getting there. The goal, 85%, to have 85% of the Kansans become immunized. That's what we call the level of herd immunity. Herd immunity is where it makes the, essentially drives the virus away. Because like polio, you didn't have polio. Probably most of you listening have never known anybody that had polio. I think of herd immunity like stop signs. If 85% of people stop for stop signs, you're going to be fine, pretty much, most of the time. And if 85% of people get vaccinated, you're going to be fine. But you'd like to have higher than that, but that's what it takes to get to a level of safety. So in summary, we're doing pretty well in the state of Kansas. We have overall kind of small case development and hospitalization numbers compared to other states. So be careful, get vaccinated. Avoid crowded areas without masks. And one of these days, we're going to get more towards normal. We're actually already starting to get there. So be safe, be healthy, get vaccinated, and I hope you enjoy the seminar. Thank you very much. This is Lee Norman.
And if you just joined us, welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Virtual Seminar presented by KanEquip, your local New Holland and Case IH dealer. It's time now for our weather presentation, and today it is presented by JB Pearl Sales and Service. And right now, let's learn more about JB Pearl Sales and Service.
JB Pearl Sales and Service is a full-service agribusiness retailer that is family-owned, originally based out of St. Mary's, founded in 1961. Since then, JB Pearl has stretched across 2 other locations in Perry, Kansas and Topeka, Kansas. Their success is due to focus on sound agronomy experience and getting the right products to the right operation at the right time. We do this by focusing on each individual operation and seeing where to increase not only yield, but overall ROI. Give us a call today, check out our website, log on to Facebook, or contact your local high yield specialist.
Well, as you can see with Mother Nature, we can see all types of weather in Kansas. Snow and freezing temperatures in April in Kansas. Well, as a lifelong Kansan, I always tell people after a stretch like that, welcome to Kansas weather. Here to give us her outlook on what farmers and ranchers may see weather-wise during planting season and into the summer months is Mary Knapp, service climatologist with the Weather Data Library in the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University. As part of the Weather Data Library and as service climatologist, she occupies a unique position in the Department of Agronomy. She is responsible for answering questions on climate and weather matters, but she also maintains the Mesonet website that provides a constant update and complete archive of weather-related data for Kansas. We have had Mary on for many years on our Ag Issues programs and also during our Farm Profit programs. Today's presentation, Feast or Famine, what is on the horizon for Kansas weather? Please welcome Kansas State Service Climatologist, Mary Knapp.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me on that. I will mention that I'm not the only one that maintains the website. We have Chip Redmond, who is the network manager, and Dan Regier, who does the magic behind the scenes. But let's get right into the weather. First thing we want to talk about is, let's go over 2020. Annual mean temperatures were fairly warm. The Northwest was an area that had the cooler temperatures. And if we look at the departures from normal, you'll see, got to go to extreme Northwest Kansas to see the very cold. West Central, pretty warm. But those departures are running even in the reddest area, they were running 1 to 3 degrees warmer than normal. So given the range of temperatures that we can experience in Kansas, that's not really a huge switch in pattern. But again, it all depends upon how it comes. Also, let's look at the precipitation. These are the annual precip totals. The yellow out in western Kansas, 15 inches or less. You move into the lighter green and you're looking at up to 20 inches. Medium green, you're up to about 26 and a half inches. The darker green, you're approaching 28 inches. And down there in that dark blue corner of southeastern Kansas, they were running 46 inches or more. Some places had as much as 56 inches for the it's a very wet spring, and then it kind of spigots shut off and the things turned dry in a hurry. And here is the departure from our annual, and it's kind of bullseyes across the state. Producers in the Flint Hills had probably one of the most difficult times. They were running 10 to 7 inches below average. Not much better out in western Kansas. A lot of areas that were on the very dry side. Central Kansas came in a little bit closer to normal. The medium blue is 1 to 5 inches above average. And again, in that southeast corner where you're looking at the departures of 5.5 to as much as 10 inches above what they would normally expect. So that was 2020. I do want to throw out the snowfall because the snowfall really assisted in some of the relief out in western Kansas. The heaviest areas of snow were down in extreme southwestern Kansas and extreme northwestern Kansas. And those areas saw between 25 and 40 inches of snow. Over here in Manhattan, I was kind of on the low side. That's where that lightest blue dot is. And we're looking at 3.5 inches or less for 2020. We had almost that much yesterday, where we had 3.2 inches for our late spring snowstorm. Would also note that for us, that was not a record. Our record for that date in April is 8 inches, which we set in the 1900s. So again, it's Kansas, and we have a wide range of possibilities. And being Kansas, you guys probably didn't forget February. February was very, very cold over most of the state. The light blue areas, which were the warmest, were running about 0.5 degree below normal to normal. And the dark blue was somewhere between 13.5 to 13 degrees colder than average. And that is for the entire month. Most of it was concentrated in the middle of February when we had that Arctic front come through and we actually had sub-zero temperatures. It was quite a sight. And one fortunate thing with that is most of the winter wheat was behind average development. So it was not as vulnerable to that February cold outbreak as we've seen in other years where we have a very mild winter and then we get hit by the late season freeze. February moisture, nobody had above normal in that. It ranged from about 2 inches below normal in the southeast to 0.5 inch to 1/10 of an inch below normal in the northwest. One of the big driving factors in that is the fact that the southeast doesn't have as much of a dry pattern in the winter as is prevalent in the western parts of the state. So it's easier to build up bigger deficits in that corner where you would typically expect more into the late winter and early spring. March, again, a split personality, warmer than normal in the east and cooler than normal on the west, but not a huge shift. The red Darkest red areas are about 5 to 5.5 degrees warmer than normal for the month. So it was significant warmth. The western areas, they're running 1 to 2 degrees cooler than average. But this is the big news, the March rainfall. Sometimes it's called a miracle March, and that is definitely what we saw. The darker green was the drier area, and that was almost a half an inch above what we would normally see in March. The darker blue, we're looking at 4.5 to almost 6 inches above what they would normally see in March. So again, very welcome, particularly for the winter wheat producers and for the canola producers to get some of that moisture into the ground. The soils were not frozen, and so there was a lot of penetration from that rainfall. This is again the March summary, looking at it by divisions, and note statewide averaged almost 4 inches, and that was again almost 2 times what we would normally expect in March. You see the western divisions were well above, Northwest taking the cake at 262% of normal. But again, everybody was above normal, and that pushed the year to date above normal across the state. Other thing that's noteworthy in March is the range of temperatures that we had. We had a high of 92 at Syracuse and Hamilton County on the 30th of March. And we had a low of 10 degrees at the Garden City Experiment Station on the 1st of March. So again, those are the 82-degree temperature swings going in March. Moving on to the Drought Monitor. This is the latest Drought Monitor. It will be updated tomorrow morning, but Greg decided to have this on Wednesday, so you'll have to check out the Climate Prediction Center for the latest. And all of the talk that I've heard is there won't be any change for Kansas in this week's Drought Monitor, given the cooler temperatures that we've seen through the week. And if we zoom in a little bit closer on Kansas, we're about 78% drought free. We still have severe to moderate drought lingering in the western areas of the state. And that isn't going to improve anytime soon because they have, again, been on the short stick as far as rainfall goes, and they don't generally get a lot of rain out west, so it's much harder to drive that drought pattern away. But this is how much change we had since the start of the calendar year, where you see that darkest green, there was 3 categories improvement in that. In the middle green, it's 2-class improvement, and the lighter green is a 1-class improvement. So that would be moving from D0 or abnormally dry to drought free in that 1-class change. Current soil moistures, and that was as of this morning, 2 inches. We're beginning to see a little dryness develop in the south central part of the state. But if we look at the 20-inch moisture, we do have a fairly nice profile of moisture. So if we can get our normal rains into April, to finish off April and move into May, that will be helpful as we start trying to get those spring seeded crops up and going. Last I heard, there's about 10% of the corn planted. There are a few fields of soybeans that have been out, particularly in the southeast corner. But again, across the state, those crops are not liking the soil temperatures that we've been seeing in the last couple of days. These are the weekly average for the 2-inch and 4-inch soil temperatures, and it might be kind of hard to read the numbers, but we're looking at mid-40s for most of the state. It's only when you get down into the southeast area where you're starting to see the 2-inch soil temperature average still being in the 50s. And the 4-inch is very similar to that. There is going to be two articles about the latest cold spell and its potential impact on both the wheat and into the corn crop in the Agronomy e-update tomorrow. So you can check that out and get the latest from Romulo and Ignacio about what kind of impacts you might expect from this most recent cold spell. Moving into the future a little bit, 8 to 14 day precip outlook is neutral. It's pretty much calling for normal precipitation. In the eastern part of the state, that's about 1/10 of an inch a day. In the western, it's more like 5/100 of an inch a day. So eastern, you would expect to get something like 3/4 of an inch in the week. In the western, about 4/10 of an inch. So again, that's kind of what they're looking for in the April 28th to May 4th timeframe. Temperature outlook, it's interesting to note that the warmth is going to be confined basically to the west of the Rockies down into Texas, and then again along the eastern seaboard. There is a bubble of below normal temperatures that it's expected to dominate the four corners of Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and eastern Kansas. And so we'll see how that plays out. We are expecting freezing temperatures again tonight, but by Monday, we're expecting highs to be around 82. So again, it's Kansas, and those temperatures can swing rather rapidly. This is the quantitative precipitation forecast. It's an outlook for how much moisture might come with that chance of rain. And where you see that lightest green, they're looking at generally 1/10 of an inch or less. So that would be below what we would normally expect. In the darker green, you're looking at 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, which would be flirting with what we would normally get. And only extreme southeastern Kansas is likely to see something above what would be typical for a week at the end of April, beginning of May. May temperature outlooks, warmer than normal. That ranges from fairly cool up in the northeast, up in the northwest still, and very warm along the Oklahoma border in south central Kansas. Precipitation outlooks, we're going to be squeezed between wetter than normal conditions along the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley down into Florida, and drier than normal from southwest Kansas through the Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado area and into Texas. So again, a lot will depend upon how those frontal systems move, and can we push that chance for drier conditions further south and leave it to Texas and Oklahoma to get, maybe drag that wetter conditions a little bit further west. We'll just have to see how that plays out. 3-month outlook, not encouraging. This is the May, June, July outlook, and it favors a slight tilt towards drier than average. That's not what we want to see, but if it comes in timely amounts at timely intervals, it could be better than having a very dry May and June and have all our rain come in July, or vice versa, have all our rain in May and nothing in June and July. So again, we'll have to see how that spreads out over the entire 3-month period. June to August outlook as we're going into the summer, again, not encouraging. It's favoring drier than normal and warmer than normal, and that's going to be a double whammy. If we've got those warmer temperatures, that's going to increase the demand, and if we're having drier temperatures, it's going to be easy to slide back into the drought stages by the end of August. So why do we have what we're having? One is that there's a transition in the ENSO, It's moving from a La Nina phase to a neutral phase. Unfortunately, when it is in that neutral phase, the impact it has on our storm systems and weather patterns is less, and so it's not likely to influence a whole lot. And they are expecting those neutral conditions to continue for the spring and actually into the fall, maybe into the September, November timeframe. This next chart shows the probabilities of the different states of the Pacific waters, where you see the dark blue line, that is a La Nina condition, gray is neutral, and red is an El Nino. And red is not showing up on our chart very much at all. It's fairly little probability of that happening, which is unfortunate because for us, an El Nino has a much stronger signal for wetter conditions. The La Nina in the opposite side of things favors drier than normal, and that will depend largely on when that La Nina might redevelop. And if it waits until the October, November, December timeframe, or November, December, January, it's not going to have as much impact on our Kansas weather. If the onset starts in the July, August, September, it would be a stronger signal for a hot, dry fall. So we'd like to push that off as long as possible. And if it waits till November, December, January, it's going to have less negative impact on us in Kansas. So some resources, the Kansas Mesonet, mesonet.ksu.edu, our state climate office here at Manhattan, climate.ksu.edu, and of course CocoRa's, where you can get the rainfall totals, snow totals close to your area. This is the Kansas Mesonet website. If you haven't visited that, check it out. We've got a lot of new tools out there. Spring freeze data, soil temperature data is at your fingertips. The other thing to note is we're expanding that network quite a bit. There are a lot of new stations that are added. We added a couple up in Northwest Kansas, and they are in the process of putting one in the field right now in Bourbon County, near Uniontown is where it's going to be at. And they're actually in the field right now working on getting it installed. So check that out. It can be very useful. If you want to see the tools, there's 3 bars up in the corner, take you to the menu, and you can move through that. On our Kansas climate page, we put up a monthly ag climate update. We also have weekly drought updates that are available, and you can find historical information, soil temperatures, and other things that might be of interest. CocoRa's, if you haven't heard about that, that's the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. Volunteers use a standard gauge to report the precipitation and snow in their area. We do have a supply of CocoRa's gauges available. If somebody's interested in joining that network, they can just click on that Join CocoRa's button on the website and fill out the information, and we can see about getting you a gauge. Some additional sites to remember: the Climate Prediction Center forecasts. You want to get those updated forecasts. They also have the ENSO update at that point. The Joint Agricultural Weather USDA site is very helpful if you want to see what's happening in other areas around the world. Say you're a wheat producer and you want to know what's going on in the Ukraine as far as weather goes and those impacts. That can be very, very helpful. Similarly, they have reports on South America and what conditions they're experiencing there. Lastly, National Weather Service, weather.gov, gives you an updated on the forecast. You can get hourly forecasts, so you can look at potential for spraying, or if you're looking at burning, what the conditions might be like down the road as you're trying to plan your field activities. Finally, you can have my contact information. The 532 number is my desk phone, and I'm actually allowed to work in the office. So I'm in there most days. But if you can't get me on that, you can reach me at my cell at 785-313-1562. And also check out my email. And that is the end of my slideshow. So if you have any questions.
I do, as a matter of fact, Mary, and as you pulled up the Climate Prediction Center's 30 and 90-day, but more specifically 30-day outlook for the month of May, which typically is the prime of severe weather season in the state. And as we all know, last year during 2020, we had very little as far as severe weather is concerned, very little as far as tornadoes. With that forecast of what they said of it probably be more trending towards normal to below normal precipitation chances, are we going to see a month of May devoid of severe weather for most of the month?
Not necessarily, because one thing is that it may be off to a slow start. We've only had 2 tornadoes so far this year. Both of those were in March on opposite sides of the state, one in western Kansas, one in eastern Kansas. But we've had slow starts before and then have a breakout weekend or midweek where you'll have 40 tornadoes in a 2-day period. And those jump the numbers up very, very quickly. So it behooves everyone to have their safety plan in place and be ready for that severe weather if it should develop. And if we can cross off another year without a severe tornado outbreak, we'll say good. And all those storm chasers will just have to go somewhere else to look for their tornadoes.
Well, they're all in southeast United States, it seems like, for the first 4 months of the year.
Well, when you look at it, they talk about Kansas being in Tornado Alley, and there really are several tornado alleys. And the southeast tends to be the late winter, early spring, because the clash of air masses sets up there first. So they have those cold fronts running into the warm air, which is what is triggering those storms. And they tend to be a little bit earlier. Kansas, our peak month is usually May, but we've had them as early as January and as late as December. So we can get it just about any time of the year. And indeed, some of our early winter tornadoes have been the result of a front like we got that had came through yesterday, where you have a very rapid change in the in both the humidity and in the air temperatures. So you can start out with severe storms at the front end of that storm system and end up with a blizzard on the back end.
Mary, one other thing I wanted to talk about, and you had mentioned the drought area and the fact that that drought area could expand. Boy, it's just, you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, where Missouri has 0 drought, Kansas has some, but then you go, say, the Nebraska Panhandle, eastern Colorado, and far western Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Texas Panhandle, and points west. I don't know if brutal is the best way to describe it, but that they're in the throes of a major drought in that area.
Right there, it's very brutal there. They had a very weak monsoon last year, and the monsoonal activity contributes a lot to their water year. So that means that they're basically looking at least 3 more months before there's any kind of improvement whatsoever. And even an active monsoon isn't going to resolve this multi-year drought that they're facing now. And basically, if you go to the Continental Divide and west, you've got some pretty strong drought signals. Another area that is noteworthy is the northern plains. It hasn't shown up as a whole bunch of extreme to exceptional drought yet, but their snow season and was very, very weak, and they do get a significant portion of their moisture as snow in the winter. They're already culling herds, pulling cattle off of their pastures. And unfortunately for them, if they don't get a decent rain in May, it really gets too late for their pastures to have much recovery before the next year. The other problem that's going to be big is it's going to be a big fire season for the western areas.
All right. Well, Mary, as always, we appreciate you being a part of our farm profit programs with your insight and everything that you guys do at Kansas State University. If they haven't checked out the Mesonet site, they need to, and we very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And again, if anybody has any questions, my email and my contact information is there, and I'd be happy to answer them.
All right. That is Mary Knapp, who is joining us. She is service climatologist with the Weather Data Library in the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University.
Welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Seminar. I'm Brendan Meinhardt.
I'm Grant Meinhardt. In these sessions today, you'll hear from industry experts, from weather to COVID-19 to Daryl Holday is going to give market updates, just kind of get more in depth on your guys' business.
As part of the next generation here at KanEquip, Grant and I'd like to welcome you into our dealerships. We also believe that education is an important role in what we do here at KanEquip. We feel like sponsoring these events can give you insight into a changing ag world.
We'd like to invite you into any one of our 14 locations across Kansas and one in Nebraska. This is a relationship business and one of the best businesses that we can be in today.
Well, we've been showing a graphic of all of our sponsors for this year's virtual farm credit program, and it's presented by KanEquip, your local New Holland and Case IH dealer. Our thanks to JB Pearl Sales and Service, Kansas Corn, Webb & Associates, Auctioneers and Appraisers, Tiffany Cattle Company, Kansas Soybean Commission, Harms Plainview Ranch, Blue Stem Farm and Ranch Supply, Elevate Ag, and the sponsor of our next presentation of the financials in agriculture, Frontier Farm Credit. And here's more about Frontier Farm Credit.
We are a financial cooperative, which means the farmers and ranchers who are our customers are also our owners. Their ownership provides a unique perspective on how we do business.
I think that's huge. It's governed by its member farmer owners. Profits go back to the people that use it and have a say in governing it. So I think that's a big factor in why I'm a big believer in farm credit. With the ability to vote on the elections, to be able to talk to a board of director if needed, it's very easy as a member owner to be active in it. I think that's a huge value, because when you do sit on a board of directors for something like that, you realize how the decisions are made. The decisions are made by people just like you that have a vested interest in this. It's not an outside investor. It's not a a hedge fund that's making decisions that affect your livelihood. It's people just like you.
Farm Credit looks at crop insurance as a business, as an entity, and they really value our input, not only to help our situation, but hey, what do you think? Where do you think other farmers are seeing their coverage levels? You know, do you see guys increasing them or decreasing them? So they get feedback from us, and we get feedback from them. It's really about that personal relationship, and you know, rather than just touching base once a year when it's time to collect your insurance premium, it's more of a year-round. You know, every few months we get in touch. Hey, is there anything going on? Anything we need to know about? You know, what are you hearing out in the countryside? How are crops looking? And they want input from us as much as we look for input from them.
So the first year we used the remote deposit, we saved ourselves $2,000 just in interest charges by using that, going away from taking the check to the local bank and then having to transfer funds back into the line of credit.
And I think in any farming operation, efficiency is huge. I mean, no matter what, the more efficient you can be, the more profitable you're going to be, and that's really ultimately what we're after. And you know, Farm Credit's trying to help us be there, and so if we can be more efficient, that's only gonna help us, you know, put more in our pocket.
The Cashback Dividends, I think, is an amazing program. Was very much surprised the first year that I did business with Farm Credit Services of the dividend that I got back. Certainly didn't expect that much. I was told that it could be pretty good, but for competitive rates around the countryside, many different institutions, number one, Farm Credit Services is very competitive to start with, but if you factor in the cashback dividend to it, it really turns the tables.
For one thing, our Farm Credit team they're not just Farm Credit people, they're part of our community, and they're people that we go to dinner with, they're people that we go to church with, and they're our friends, and then we also do business together, and that is big when you go to do something or take off a big bite. We both feel pretty confident that if we did have a bad year or something, they'd be behind us. They're rooting for us. They want us to succeed just as bad as we do.
When it comes to agriculture, nowhere else will you find the financial products that save your money, services that save your time, or plans to protect your income like the ones you find at Frontier Farm Credit.
And Frontier Farm Credit has been a long-time sponsor of our farm profit programs throughout the past many years, and really appreciate their insights into the financials of agriculture. And today we're going to hear more about that ride that farmers and ranchers have been on throughout 2020 and into 2021. Joining us is Perry Briggs, Regional Vice President of Business Development for Northeast Kansas with Frontier Farm Credit. He leads teams that support rural communities and agriculture with reliable and consistent credit and financial service today and tomorrow. And just remember, too, as a cooperative, Frontier Farm Credit serves over 7,000 customer owners in the eastern 41 counties of Kansas. Perry's roots are deep in agriculture, including still being involved in his family's ranch located just outside of Emporia in the Flint Hills. His presentation tonight is entitled, "What a Ride, a Look Back at Last Year." Would you please welcome Perry Briggs with Frontier Farm Credit.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate being part of the program again this year. And as we kind of look back at the last year, I'm going to share a lot of things that are different this year, and especially the program we're having tonight is a little different. And I wish we were in the same room having this conversation, but we'll look forward to the get-togethers this summer and seeing everybody's faces as this stuff gets behind us. So. I'm sorry to share here. Okay, you got my screen, Greg?
Indeed, we do.
Okay, I'll get going here. So I changed the title a little bit. I think Greg, from when I last gave you the presentation, I said 2020, what a ride. And I wanted to step back and maybe think about that a little different, because 2020 was a extremely challenging year for a number of different industries, ag being one of those as well too, but also it was kind of a tale of two seasons, I guess you'd say. And if you think back to a year ago where we were at when we had these farm profits, I think we were halfway through them maybe when they got canceled because of COVID. But we were really in a point where we were in a really challenging situation just a year ago. And a lot of things have happened in the last year, and that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about tonight. And we've seen a big change in the agriculture sectors in general. And I think part of what we want to get across tonight is that we don't know how long those are going to be around. So it's a great opportunity to take advantage of those while they're here. So this is a slide from American Farm Bureau, or a chart from them. If you look in particular, it's nothing new that most people in agriculture realize that it's been a choppy ride for about every 3 to 5 years. We kind of have a turn in ag. But if you remember the conversations we've had at Farm Profits seminars over the last few years, we've been talking about these years through here. And in particular, the compressed margin environments. We had the ethanol boom for 10 years, and then we had some drawback from there, and production caught up and we took care of that. But what happened in 2020, we saw quite a rebound in net farm income. And there's a number of things that drive that, but this was one of the first years we actually saw people at the end of the year have to maybe wonder about tax planning, and something they haven't had to battle for a while. So you can see that we've had quite a rebound and shift in ag, but for everybody remembering just past the last 6 to 8 months, this was a long drawn out kind of valley we had to work through. And there's a number of different things we had to do to change maybe our operations and what were in our plans because of those years. These charts, I'm not going to get into the details a lot of, but what is the additional profitability done to the credit environment? People always ask, how are farmers and ranchers doing, and how do we see it as lenders? If you look at this top chart up here, this is just where our credit quality has gone. If you go back to kind of the bottom of would be the summer of 2019, and since then we've seen a long drought of people rebounding. So you start to think about maybe what changed in the middle of the summer of 2018. Going into the fall, we had some government payments from some of the trade support programs that were out there, and we've seen a steady rebound of the credit environment since then. Most lenders track a couple different things they have to report for regulatory issues, where these stand out: delinquencies, what loans are not able to make their payments. You can see the trend. Most payments are due the first part of the year, so that's why you see this part. The historical trend the last few years has been a little bit higher, but you can see this red line coming in 2021 that we're quite a bit lower than we've been in a while. So everybody's had enough ample cash on hand to be able to make payments. And we also look at what we call non-performing loans, essentially, on our portfolio. And you can see that the trend for a while has been through there over the last 3 years, and coming into 2021. That's dropped off significantly. We've seen most of our non-performing loans have a chance to rebound, whether that's finding ways to, alleviate the situations via cash flow or some changes to their operation, but some significant changes that we've seen on the credit as well because of the additional profitability. So what's changed really? So you step back and say, okay, we have higher net income, we have maybe some rebound in some credit things, and lending's a little easier for a lot of operations to get credits. But what's really changed? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these charts, probably because you can't see them in depth anyways, because Daryl will cover a lot of this, I believe, in his presentation. But on the left, you see this is the cash corn index for the United States. And the bottom two lines are essentially the Board of Trade and the cash corn index average over the last 4 years. And you can see over the last 4 years, we've been stuck in a pretty level area of what we've expected for commodity prices. And if you start to go back to last year and what's changed over really the last probably 9 months in particular, you see quite a bit of change in this pattern. So that's nothing new to a lot of people probably on this evening's call, that we're seeing significantly higher prices than we've seen in a long time. We've finally broken out of that trend. There's a number of reasons probably because of that, so I'm going to let Daryl cover those for the most part. But soybeans, you can see the same pattern. And so you can see we were stuck in a 4-year trend for a long time of really that $8 to $9 range in beans, and sometimes into 7, sometimes in mid 9s. But for the most part, we saw a significant change in the beans too. We had a breakthrough, and that has drastically affected the profitability of a lot of operations. These charts in particular, you might not be able to see. I'm going to try to highlight a few of them. This is information from Cattle Facts that shows just even the livestock, even though they have maybe had to battle higher feed prices recently, and they had to battle some supply chain issues a year ago. For the most part, they've had a good rebound since their COVID challenges as well too. So still tighter margins in the livestock world right now, but even if you look back a year ago, we've had some significant changes from prices just a year ago to where we are now. So we can remember a year ago where the cattle markets went, where some of the livestock market went. There were some people struggling. The supply chain is really challenged at that time, and we've seen a decent rebound to work through some of that. We got a long way to go on the livestock end, but I think people are pretty optimistic of the direction we're going. But another thing in particular to point out is the weakening of the dollar through that process too. So I'm going to also let Daryl hit on that probably a little bit as well. But the weakening of the dollar has been pretty favorable for exports as well. So all of a sudden, our commodities look somewhat more affordable across the global spectrum. But I think it's important to step back and say what else has changed. And this is probably nothing new to a lot of people, but government payments have been significantly affecting to operations as they've looked at the cash flow and the profitability of their operations. So yes, we have seen a run up in grain prices as of the last 6 to 8 months. But even the last couple of years before that, as I said, that low of 2018-19 summer, towards the back end of 19, we started to see some significant government payments come into play. So we had the marketplace facilitation payments come into play first, and then most recently we've had the CFAP payments. And we haven't seen this type of government payment support in the last 20 years, so it's been very significant. It's been very impactful to a lot of operations. And when you look at how much net income is actually coming from government payments, when you go back to that first chart, we've had a big rebound in net income. We've seen about 39% of the net income over this last year, and this is from American Farm Bureau again, showing that 39% of the net income is directly from the government payments. So what does that mean? That means really that's the rebound in income, although it's favorable, there's been some things that help support that we haven't expected. So, but in particular, we think the long-term outlook on grain prices are going to give some people some profitability options this year as well too. As lenders and as Farm Credit, a couple things we always get asked about in particular is Farmland Trends. So what's going on with land prices? What's the trend, and what are we seeing? And I think we've seen a drastic change in this area as well too. And to share a little bit of information here, and I'll try to highlight Kansas. This information is as of the first of the year, and I anticipate by midsummer when we do this again, it's going to be even higher. But these numbers are based off our benchmark farms that we appraise consistently every 3 to 6 months to make sure we understand the land patterns in the marketplace. We reappraise them and see what the values have done. But you can see in Kansas, a 5-year trend, we're up. We never really had the big drawback in land prices as much as some of the states to our north and east. But you can see the 1-year trend over year, we're up 2.5% almost. This is as of January 1st. From what we've seen as recent land prices, land auctions that have been active this first quarter of the year, I anticipate those being up even higher. We've seen some pretty aggressive land prices and some bidding. As you can see, the comments out of our appraisal team this last year have been the increase in grain commodity prices and low interest rates and government payments have pushed land prices to a really strong position. And also limited supply, as I mentioned in there. So there have been significantly less sales this year than we've seen in a while. There's a number of reasons probably for that. One of them could be that maybe people that were having to make some changes to their operation because of financial stress maybe aren't having to do it as much, and they're probably able to hold on to land and maybe hold on to those farms a little longer than they they had been over the last couple of years because of the increased profitability on their operation. You can see a breakdown between pasture and cropland over here on the right, and you can see pasture continues to increase as well too. So overall, farmland trend is up, and it's going to probably continue that way. And that's probably going to affect a lot of operations this next year in a number of ways that I'll talk about here in a bit. The other thing we get asked about quite often is interest rate trends and where we're going with interest rates. So if you go back and look at the 10-year Treasury as kind of the driving force and kind of, I'd say, the measuring stick for the interest rate world, and it kind of correlates directly with how Farm Credit gets a lot of their funding. And then essentially community banks tend to follow that direction as well too after we do. So you look at this is a chart showing the last 30 years plus almost 40 years now, going back to the early 80s as interest rate trend. And you can see we were on a significant downward trend. Of course, we had extremely high rates in the early 80s, mid 80s. And I was pretty young at that point, but I can remember my parents having those conversations about how are we going to make, 16, 17, 18% interest rate payments. And probably was an extremely fun time. But since then, we've had a significant change, and the long-term trend of interest rates has been lower, lower, lower. So if you go back from 2012 on, though, when the Obama administration was in office and maybe our economic growth has slowed down, we really leveled off quite a bit on interest rates, and we stayed significantly low and really attractive rates for a long time. And we started to try to work our way back up on interest rates here about 18, 20 months ago. And the Fed had made a comment they want to continue to try to increase rates back up because they wanted to have the dry powder to make changes to the economy when they had a chance. And if they kept rates completely flat, they weren't going to be able to do that. So we started up that long-term trend, and then what happened last spring, of course, COVID hit, and we saw a complete crash and saw even more, I guess, historical record lows. And was even discussion at one point over the last 12 months, are we going to see negative interest rates in the United States? Because we did see some significantly low rates that I don't think we will probably ever see again in a lot of our lifetimes. When you think about the cost of a 10-year Treasury in the mid, 1.5 range right now, or whatever that number might be as of today, and the Fed saying they're going to try to keep inflation close to 2%, effectively that's a negative interest rate because you're borrowing money cheaper than the rate of inflation. So, but if you see to the very end of that circle, if you can see that on that chart very well, we've started to see a rebound. And there's a lot of things in the yield environment and the interest rate Treasury environment, bond markets, that make people start to wonder, have we seen a reversal on the long-term trend? So that has been such a long-term trend of down rates that we've kind of probably hit bottom, and are we seeing the reversal right now? We don't know yet, but we have seen those Treasuries work themselves up about 25 to 50 points over the last 3 or 4 months. But still historically extremely low rates. And it's a fantastic opportunity, especially for a lot of operations that haven't taken advantage of the rates yet, to continue to lock in some extremely cheap interest rates. That's going to impact our operation for a long time. And it's really a great opportunity to ensure that you're keeping that part of your operations cost as low as possible. So what's the Fed telling us about rates? Everybody kind of hears the Fed minutes and the Fed comments. You're not going to be able to see this chart very well, and I don't expect you to, but I want to point out this was the December 2020 Fed meeting. And essentially all these little blue dots you see on this chart are votes from the Fed governors saying what exactly do they anticipate rates doing over the next couple of years. So this first part was 2020. You can see 2021. Every one of these people voted that they think rates are going to stay completely next to zero, the range of being 0 to 25 points. I could see get into 2022, there was one person voting they think they could be higher at that point. You get out to 2023 and you got a few people saying, okay, these rates are going to go up a little bit. We're going to be recovered as far as an economy. And then the long-term outlook, when you get out of 3 years plus, a lot of the Fed members felt that we're going to work our way back up in this range to have a healthy economy. So that was December 2020. And a lot has changed in the economy since then. A lot of things have changed in the news. But you can start to see this pattern. This is 2021. The Fed members are still saying we anticipate this is going to stay at very, very low rates and not make any movements throughout 2021. And they're committed to saying that. But as you can see, 2022, we're starting to see some people start to say, wait a second, we could see some higher rates because this economy is recovering maybe faster than what we thought. And you get to 2023 and you see some more people even voting for that. The point is, things can change quickly in this world in interest rates. And the Fed, although what they're saying their long-term outlook is, just in the last 4 or 5 months since they've had meeting to meeting, they've changed significantly on maybe what the long-term outlook is here. But these comments are out of the last meeting minutes, and it says Chairman Powell has really laid out 3 standards that must be met before they are going to increase rates. First one being is the labor market is completely recovered. And we've seen a significant recovery in the labor market since last spring, last summer. Things are opening back up in the world. We're starting to see some of the entertainment industry and the food and beverage industry starting to bring people back and hire people back. And that's been positive, but we're still about probably 200,000 to 300,000, initial filings for jobless claims each week above where we were before the COVID outbreak. So that's about 30% still higher than where we were at one time. So we haven't quite fully recovered, and it's probably going to be a few months, as maybe you heard Dr. Norman say, we worked through some of this, that we're going to see a rebound here before the labor market's fully employed again. Inflation has reached 2%. So they want to see inflation reach 2%, but they want to see it to be above that for a sustainable time. So the comment right now you hear about inflation is inflation going to stay high, or is it just the government pumping enough money in here that's going to make it high for a little bit? We don't know yet. If you look at the housing costs, of course, and some of the inputs, a lot of our operations are seeing day-to-day inflation feels like it's here right now. So, but the Fed's saying we want to see it here for a significant period before we're going to raise rates. And you can see his comments there. Until then, we won't. So the Fed's telling us, we're going to keep rates low, but you see some people starting to change their sentiment on that a little bit. And we're starting to see some of those financial indicators that maybe it could be sooner than what we thought. So what's on the horizon for going forward for this, for the industry we're in agriculture today? We're seeing rising costs of production. That's something that follows land prices, really. And we're seeing variable costs obviously work their way up a little bit with fuel and fertilizer prices. You can see this chart to the right is the cost of fuel and fertilizer. The 3 different high usage fertilizers throughout the last year. You can see the huge increase in prices in liquid, dry, and gas. And you can see that's obviously affecting a lot of operations during planting season, but also fixed rising cost of production. So land prices are going up. They're going up significantly, it feels like. And we know that people that are landlords and investors, they're going to want to see a better return on that investment they have. So likely we will see some cash rents going up as well too, going into next year as we reset those into the fall and winter. And continuing market volatility. I think everybody knows whether it's inputs or fuel, fertilizer, or even just our grain markets, commodity markets, interest rate markets, we're going to see continued volatility. So we know those things are probably for sure going to be around for the foreseeable future. The unknowns that we don't know about, are probably some things to start asking about. We don't know what trade's going to continue to do. We've seen some significant rebound in trade. We've seen some of these trade agreements really start to pan out. We don't know how long-term those are going to be and how they'll continue to grow, but the value of the dollar is going to affect some of that as well too. We don't know if inflation's here. We don't know how high it could go. We don't know what the government will do and how effective they will be when they try to stop inflation. So that's an unknown right now that we have to start thinking about. Less government support is obviously something that's probably on a lot of people's radar as well too. So the government payments we've seen over the last number of years, we probably can't count on those going into the future. And when I say less government support, this isn't a political comment, but it might be different types of government support. So obviously different administration, different side of the aisle, they start to look at different types of programs to support different types of behaviors they want to see. So this might be a point where we start to see more conservation type of incentives or whatever the case is. But Right now, we're seeing it's probably going to be less government support, which is probably what we predict, but we don't know what that's going to look like at this point. And increased regulation and tax burden. So everything in the news you hear today in agriculture, in particular with all the commodity groups, is the significant concern with the tax bills that are out there right now with a number of different congressmen and women in Washington. So whether you're talking about stepped up basis changes, estate tax changes, income tax changes, there's a number of things that could affect farmers and ranchers in the future. And that might be one of the bigger concerning ones we've seen in a long time in agriculture. That feels like something that's going to be, we're along with part of that fight, but it's really, we're going to be affected by it, but it really is not our fight that we wanted to be involved with to begin with, but it's going to affect a lot of farmers and ranchers if that continues to gain momentum. So what can you do as an operator with all these changes in the past 12 months, but obviously what can you do to position yourself in the future? Short term, first thing we always recommend is knowing your cost of production. That is probably one of the most important things a producer can do. And it's probably honestly one of the things that most producers don't sit down and actually pencil out. So a lot of people are looking at $12 beans, $5 cash corn for new crop, and they're thinking, gosh, I can make money at that. But what they're not looking at is saying, okay, if I take government payments out from last year, if I increase my fertilizer costs by 30, 40, 50%, if I increase possibly my rent costs, maybe that didn't happen this year, could happen next year. We know fuel is going to be a little higher. We're going to have some significant changes to cost structures. So we encourage people to sit down and understand their cost production as much as they can. And take advantage of the opportunities in front of you. So whether it's interest rate markets we talked about, whether it is the commodity markets, and Daryl can predict what opportunities we're going to continue to see. There are some fantastic opportunities in front of people right now to take advantage of. Long term are the same things we always say. So failing to plan is planning to fail. So first and foremost is have a plan. And these are the types of things we recommend. A marketing plan. When will you pull the trigger on these grain prices? Of course, you have to know your cost of production and know when to pull the trigger. Risk management plans, crop insurance, and some of your risk management plans are extremely important. We heard Mary talk about the volatility and weather. I think it's more important than ever to understand the risk management plans on your operation. And if you haven't checked out the crop insurance products that are out there today, they have significantly changed and became pretty dynamic over the last few years to protect risk and revenue on your operation. Estate plans, obviously you want to understand what your goals are there, especially with tax plans coming. Capital purchase plans. And as we look at increased profitability, we don't want to get back into the same thing we saw a number of years ago where we get into a tax problem and all of a sudden we're possibly buying capital purchases on our operation just to avoid taxes. So make sure you have those plans laid out in front of you, because if you have that in front of you, you're going to have a better decision-making ability when it comes to tax season to make sure you're purchasing the things that are important to your operation. And then really just a business plan. Where do you go over the next 3-5 years? What are you trying to achieve? Are you growing? Are you trying to bring people back into your family's operation? Whatever the case is, it's important to have that business plan of what you're trying to achieve as well too. So the other thing is be disciplined with your practices and your decisions, because you remember that 5-year lull, 6-year valley we worked through there through some tighter net income years. We started to do some things like understand our cost of production, do some planning, and we tightened the belt a little bit in a number of areas. And it allowed us to get back to where we were able to break even and make some profits here and there. Now that we might be in a better profitable marketplace, we want to make sure we keep those disciplines and practices. And don't get wrapped up in the short-term environment and understand your long-term goals, because there's a lot of noise going on right now. There's some extremely bullish ag news with carryover supplies and weather and South American weather concerns, and these markets could get extremely attractive for a while. But make sure you understand your long-term goals and what you're trying to achieve. A great resource to check some of these things out. First, if you want to get a hold of us and you want to talk to an ag lender and see what we can do for you, or crop insurance experts, sure, go to our website, our frontierfarmcredit.com. But more so, if you're not a customer even, you can go check out some of our education resources. So we have some webinars consistently out there throughout the year from professional economists. We have blogs, we have videos that can talk to you about different types of insurance coverages, and then payment calculators to see what you can do by saving how many dollars per acre or per head on your operation. So a lot of educational resources out there. So go check that website out and see if any of those can help you in your operation. with that, I'll wrap up. I want to wish everybody a safe and productive season, safe planting season, and we're looking forward to seeing all of you hopefully this summer at some of the Farm Profit summer seminars, and enjoying to get together and maybe putting the past year behind us a little bit.
All right, Perry, thank you. Got a couple of questions for you. As we get through this year and we look at this volatility, and knowing potentially, we don't know as of yet what could be coming down the pike, specifically as we look at tax increases, stepped up basis, capital gains, you name it. How hard is it for that customer, your customer or any other customer, to say, how can they not look that, be worried about that, but yet try to keep their long-term goals, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Greg, because we're getting a lot of people asking, what should we do on our estate plan, or should we be transitioning land at this point? There's a number of questions going through producers' head as they hear some of these things in the news right now. And what we encourage people to do is visit with a professional estate planner, or a family attorney, or whoever the case is, your accountants, and make sure you understand what is your goal first, and say, if I'm trying to pass this on, if I'm trying to bring in another generation, if I'm trying to avoid taxes, what does it look like today? 80% of your plan is probably going to be pretty consistent regardless of tax bills. Now, if they turn around and change things this fall, if they get the votes that they're hoping to get to change some of these in Washington, you might have to make some changes and adapt a little bit. But the long-term goals shouldn't change based on just tax environment or Washington policy. So I'd make sure you understand what you're trying to achieve first, and then build backwards from there, and then see what the environment is when you put it together. So that'd be the advice we give people right now.
Going back to land prices, I'm kind of curious, are you seeing producers being more aggressive and trying to get more land right now too?
Yeah, so it is interesting to see how fast things have changed, where just a year or two ago, we saw some people maybe willing to give up some of their less profitable acres because they might have been losing money farming them. And now we're kind of seeing some of the patterns we saw back in 2010 through 2013. We're seeing some people aggressively trying to get cash rents. We're trying to rent some more ground. They're trying to buy some more ground. With limited supply, there's more private sales going on, and people approaching landlords trying to buy land when they can. So with as much news as has been around the government payments in agriculture over the last 18 months in particular, there is a lot of landlords that have heard, the government, the ag sector's got a lot of government payments, and land prices are going up, and there's a lot of people having to renegotiate cash rents or possibly pay bonuses based on the year or whatever the case is. But yeah, we're seeing people get pretty aggressive and try to find farm ground at this point.
And you talked about inputs, and we all know some of that situation, but I want to look at it specifically from some of the supply chain issues that we've been seeing in other areas. Apparently you can't buy furniture right at the moment. Recently we heard herbicides maybe starting to become an issue as far as finding specific ones, even implements as far as dealers are concerned. It's surprising we haven't seen more of that, but we've seen the effects in these industries on as to A, can you get what you ordered, or B, can you find what you would like to say like for herbicides or something else?
Yeah, it's the supply chain on the livestock end got a lot of interest this last year, obviously, and there's some significant changes I think going on in that world to fix some of that. But you're right, on the input end, it's just as big a challenge, and especially where there's other industries competing for some of those same types of products. And whether it's a lumber world right now or whatever the case is, there's a number of things that are significantly affected by the global environment, and it comes down to just where are the company's resources best spent. I was trying to source some vaccines for getting some cattle grass here just a couple weeks ago, and the comment was made by who we order some of our vaccines through for cattle is that a lot of the resources are focused on the COVID vaccination and getting those out, and those supplies are going there. So there's a limited different types of cattle vaccinations right now, and so those types of things affect operations. So you got to try to plan ahead as much as you can, some things you just can't plan around, and you got to be adaptive and kind of go on and figure out how you make the best decision from there.
Isn't it always the case? And Mary Napa talked about the Mesonet site, and I saw in the far northwest corner of Kansas, it was down to 15 degrees this morning, but that you get weather like this, and you obviously don't know what kind of damage it's going to do potentially to the wheat crop, but yet no wheat, but the prices that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, that's always kind of the case. It feels like those prices are there, and somehow production doesn't come along with the prices. And if it does, be grateful, because generally a lot of those price rallies are based on tighter supplies, which means production might not be there. So they don't always work together hand in hand like they have a year or two over the last 10 years.
Okay, Perry, we're going to wrap it up, but as always, I very much appreciate it with your insight and everything else, and we thank you for joining us here on the Farm Profit Virtual Seminar.
Thanks, Greg. We appreciate it.
That is Perry Briggs with Frontier Farm Credit. Once again, frontierfarmcredit.com if you'd like more information here on the 2021 Virtual Farm Profit Seminar.
Welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Seminar. I'm Brendan Meinhardt.
I'm Grant Meinhardt. In these sessions today, you'll hear from industry experts, from weather to COVID-19 to Daryl Holday is going to give market updates, just kind of get more in depth on your guys' business.
As part of the next generation here at KanEquip, Grant and I'd like to welcome you into our dealerships. We also believe that education is an important role in what we do here at KanEquip. We feel like sponsoring these events can give you insight into a changing ag world.
We'd like to invite you into any one of our 14 locations
Greg.
across Kansas and one in Nebraska. This is a relationship business and one of the best businesses we can be in today.
All right, and once again, we'd like to thank KanEquip, your local New Holland and Case IH dealer, who's the presenting sponsor of this year's Farm Profit Virtual Seminar. Hey, just a reminder to all of you watching today's Farm Profit Seminar, if you registered for the seminar, it's your invitation to attend one of the 3 farmer appreciation dinners coming up during the month of July, and we'll update you on details, and we'll do that on our website, WIBWnewsnow.com. One benefit of having a virtual Farm Profit Seminar is that we can get updates that we normally are not able to do. One in particular is what has been happening during the Kansas legislative session. And before we get an update on that, let's hear from our sponsor of the legislative update, the good folks at Kansas Corn.
Hello, I'm Greg Krissick, CEO of Kansas Corn. First of all, we're the Kansas Corn Commission, heavily involved on behalf of all corn producers in the state of Kansas in market development, especially as it relates to higher ethanol blends and increasing opportunities of corn in all forms with our livestock customers, especially beef, hogs, and dairy cattle, as well as the opportunity in exports, where we work with U.S. Grains Council promoting corn in all forms around the world, whether that be ethanol, whole corn, or distillers grains, and then the U.S. Meat Export Federation for export of protein, especially beef and pork around the world. Looking forward to continue to work with all of those partners. And then additionally, we represent the Kansas Corn Growers Association, which is a membership organization of a number of the farmers in the state of Kansas. As an association, we do engage in the public policy arena, both at the federal and state levels. So whether that be working on farm bill, crop insurance, environmental issues with EPA, especially the continued access of farmers for the crop protection tools like atrazine. We are very engaged on national issues as well as at the state level in Topeka, where we actively participate in state legislation, proposing it and working on it on behalf of farmers throughout the state. I believe the next panel that you will be hearing from are the two legislative chairs of the agriculture committees in Topeka, Senator Kirschen and Representative Rajas, who we work with very closely and consider excellent and good friends for many years. So with that, if you'd like to learn more about any of our programs at Kansas Corn, please visit our website at kscorn.com, where you'll have the opportunity to either check out the market promotion, market development, and education opportunities that we do with the Kansas Corn Commission, or to look through our public policy positions and the items that we work on behalf of Kansas corn farmers in order to give you the opportunity to be profitable, which is what I think this Farm Profit Seminar is all about. Thank you, and look forward to visiting with you again soon.
All right, thank you very much, Greg, for the update. Well, let's first introduce our first Kansas State Legislature. Ken Rajas is serving in his 6th year as a member of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 110th District in Northwest and Central Kansas. He is currently the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee and also serves on the House Appropriations Committee and Higher Education Budget Committees. He is a small business owner with an emphasis on agricultural communications, and he is also a former WIBW Radio Kansas Ag Network farm broadcaster as well. Would you please welcome Kansas State Representative Ken Rajas?
Well, thanks, Greg. Good evening, everyone. My honor to be with you. The longstanding tradition of these farm profit conferences are something that is always great for Kansas producers. I just want to kind of give you an update of what went on in the session. In fact, we're right now what they call a spring break. Actually, we're off 3 weeks. We go back the first part of May to start our veto session. And as you've probably seen the news, the governor's vetoed a few bills and signed a few bills. I just want to highlight a couple of things maybe that you'll find of interest. I think first off, when we started in January, we weren't exactly sure what was going to be going on. So we didn't have a lot of plans this year, to be quite honest. There was a lot of cleanup work left over from last year, a lot of things that needed just to be done that we just simply ran out of time. So a lot of our focus was that on maybe changing some dates or doing some different things like that. So that was primarily this year in the session. Next year, I think we're going to see a lot more activity. We're sort of planning on a lot of things, but just want to go over about 3 bills to maybe highlight that I think are important to agriculture. One was House Bill 2244. That's the industrial hemp bill. If we had one thing to get done this year, it was that we have moved away. Kansas and the feds have moved away from just doing research, but going and doing things with moving into that next phase of industrialized hemp production. And so we needed to change some of the language based on what the feds came out with early in this year, late in the Trump administration. And so we're ready to go. That means processors. And one of the big changes is the working with folks who's going to be the Kansas Fire Marshal. So that was a bit of a change. So we'll see how that works, and we'll kind of progress there. But we wanted to get these in place as soon as possible so that we would be able to have producers that wanted to grow hemp in this growing season would be able to do that. Another slight change was making sure that those hemp products that are already on sale in some of the markets are making sure they're following federal law. So it's 0.3 level of the CBD, and so that needs to be changed for some Fed things as well. One that you may not think much about, but is important. That was Senate Bill 89. We call it the silage bill, And in Southwest Kansas, over the last couple of years, we had maybe somebody in law enforcement a little more aggressive than they should be when it comes time for silage shopping. And so we want to make sure that our producers weren't harmed, and that they, when it's time to do business and get that silage, that chop of that corn or other silage out, that they could do that. And it's a short term, but also in the house, what we decided to do is we added in that not only it goes from the field to, say, the place you store it, but also from that storage, maybe back out to a place of final use. Say, if you have silage, you go in, you ensile it, bring it back out to feed the cattle, maybe on stocks, that you can still do that and be within the realms of the law. The other thing was Senate Bill 39, and we kind of call that the Bangs Bill. Excuse me, I'm getting over a late season cold. I'm sorry about that. But the Bangs Bill really had a lot of cleanup, a lot of date changes, and so on. A couple of things of significance is when a lot of the renewals had to take place, they were happening in June 30th. And so, boy, you know what it's like on the ranch on June 30th if you have cattle. So we backed that up to September 30th. So a lot of those things will be changing. I'm sure you'll get notice of those. And then the other thing has to do with calf vaccinations. As many folks know, that that's not really required, but it's sure recommended. Those little metal ear tags. And one of the things we have done is if you want to use the RFID tags, we're not telling you, we're not doing any encouragement. It's just simply that those that choose to use the RFID tags that you get from your veterinarian, they can now charge what their cost is. USDA, maybe some of the changes have been different there. So those are just a couple of the highlights, Greg, that we did this year. I apologize for my coughing fit, but we're very much aware of what's going on for the federal level, the 30 for 30 and things that we're continuing to pay attention to. Also very concerned with some of the other regulations coming out of the administration from DC. So I think quickly, as you look at next year, we're going to continue to hopefully come to some kind of conclusion with our fake meat or manufactured alternative meats, if you will, some other things, but to really take a strong look at what happens from the feds this year and what we need to do to protect our Kansas farmers and ranchers. So, Greg, with that, again, thanks for the opportunity to visit with you and the folks in attendance tonight.
All right, Ken, thank you very much for the update from the House side. So let's move now to the Kansas Senate. State Senator Dan Kirschen represents the 26th Senate District in Kansas. He was first elected to the State House in 2008. After districts were redrawn in 2012, Kirschen ran and was elected to the Kansas Senate. He is a farmer on his family's farm near Garden Plain, is a graduate of Kansas State University, and has held various leadership positions in key organizations related to the dairy and agriculture industry. Would you please welcome Kansas State Senator Dan Kirschen?
Well, good evening, Greg and Shayla. This is, I'm sure glad to be, I had a chance, opportunity to come and visit with you this evening about ag issues in the Senate. And certainly it was a good year for us this year. We passed some 14 bills all total. And I'd like to just highlight a few of those that they're all important, but there's some kind of stand out as we want to talk about it. Not everybody has heard about. So, but thank you very much for inviting us over. We appreciate that. I wish you luck on your program, and to all the virtual listeners out there on your virtual farm profit broadcast. We appreciate everything you've done for agriculture and the communications and those things. So I'd start off with Senate Bill 27, which we did last year, and then in March, when things come apart, we had to just suspend those, and they didn't get above the line on our side. So we did some of those right off the bat this year and hit the floor running with those. One of those was the underground storage tank extension fund, and what they were doing is that underground storage tanks that are leaking need to be replaced, and all new ones have to have double lined walls now. So the adversity makes it impossible for them to leak. And so we increased the compensation from $50,000 to $100,000 to help with the cost of that. And we also increased the insurance part. So very important issue, because we can't have tanks leaking all over. And when they do leak, we have to take care of them. And most of the time it's at the owner's expense, but we can help somehow on that too. So we was glad to get that passed. Another one I thought of right away is that the pesticide waste disposal program, and what that is doing, it allocates $50,000 to this waste disposal fund. And what that fund will do is, someone wants to call in and have chemicals that they are toxic or whatever to dispose of, we can come in and do that for them, bring them to a collection place, and the cost will be covered by that $50,000 in that storage fund. It's important because we don't want people dumping them in the back of their garage or behind a windbreak somewhere. We want to keep chemicals out of the groundwater and those kinds of things. So this will be a real addition to pesticide control going forward. Another important thing is most farmers, or at least out in the central part of the state, know about Quivira Wildlife Refuge. And what there's happening out there is they were brokered a deal kind of with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the farmers of that area to appropriate the water and come up with a plan to save water costs. So unfortunately, Audubon Society has now filed suit against what we're doing out there, and that could be lengthy and long. We don't know how much long it will take. We know it could be costly. So we allocated another $30,000 for 2 years in a fund to assist the Department of Agriculture in defending that for the state of Kansas. So we're taking careful steps as we go to make sure we do this right, and that the least cost as possible. So that was pretty important stuff. That's going to be playing out over the next year for sure. So anyway, we want to look out for our producers out there who need that water, and for the wildlife folks that the Quivira gets appropriation water they need, and surely come out to an agreement where we don't have to be continually arguing and disputing the outcome. So looking back, there's another important bill we worked on this year is that grain warehouse inspection fees, that inspectors who go out to the local grain facilities and measure audit the amount of grain goes in, goes out. They're real important service, because that way the credibility of those elevators and grain storage facilities can be sure that they are marketing the grain bushel for bushel is accounted for, and the producer makes sure he gets paid. And so those they have a real important job to do. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a fee increase for over 25 years, and they still operate in the same level. And the plan was to raise those fees, but instead of raising the fees at any drastic amount, we put $60,000 of state general fund money to help keep the cost of those fees down where they can operate. So we was pleased with that effort, and we keep the greenhouse inspectors in motion. And we also extended from a year to 18 months when it's time to get their inspections taken care of. So that was part of that bill, and it was a fee increase, but at the same time we was able to hold off a major increase by adding state general fund money. So that'll keep them going forward. And as I think about other issues that we tackle, I say there's some dozen bills there that we passed successfully with good ratios, and it was passed in the House easily. So it's nice to have that kind of support and feel like we did that right. There is one of the other things that we look at. Our relationship with wildlife and parks is a good one, and I was going to want to bring them to in front of the committee. They initiated a new program this year for handling predatory animals that are on livestock. And what that means is like a coyote is what it is in significant numbers in the western part of the state, whether it's cattle, and they would be permitted to hunt those critters at night and using whatever technical means it is, scopes and infrared or whatever you want to call it. And I was curious at how that program went. I talked to the director earlier in the year, and he said it was going amazingly well. And all the surrounding states have a program like that. I got to admit, I was a little nervous about someone shooting at night, even if it is infrared scope. But so I thought we could keep an eye on what's going on there. But it sounded like they sold a lot of permits, and we just need to keep an eye on effectiveness. Are they able to do what they wanted to do with after the first year here? So it's only allowed in counties in the West that have a predatory problem. So that's pretty well makes that restrained to where it's supposed to be. But I would be curious to have a meeting where we could hear and understand how the program's doing and the benefits of it. Speaking of benefits, predatory animals, we did lose $25,000 was cut from the feral swine feral swine problem out in southeast Kansas, and that doesn't seem like a lot of money, but it still is, because when we have to keep those feral swine in control. I want to thank the broadcast station and Mr. Akagi and Shayla for inviting me to this broadcast. I appreciate it very much to talk about agricultural issues and that concern all of us, whether we live in town or in the rural parts of the state, that important things are going on out there in agriculture. We want to keep you posted on what that is and how we can make things better. So thank you very much for your interest and your inviting us here, and I wish you all the best and down the road ahead. So have a good evening.
Welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Seminar. I'm Brendan Meinhardt.
I'm Grant Meinhardt. In these sessions today, you'll hear from industry experts, from weather to COVID-19 to Daryl Holday is going to give market updates, just kind of get more in depth on your guys' business.
As part of the next generation here at KanEquip, Grant and I'd like to welcome you into our dealerships. We also believe that education is an important role in what we do here at KanEquip. We feel like sponsoring these events can give you insight into a changing ag world.
We'd like to invite you into any one of our 14 locations across Kansas and one in Nebraska. This is a relationship business and one of the best businesses we can be in today.
Sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty there. And right now, let's go into our next presentation. And that, of course, is the markets. And the markets today are presented by Webb and Associates. And let's learn more about Webb and Associates.
Gentlemen, Dave Webb of Webb and Associates. You know, if we all work together, our comeback is going to be greater than our setback. If we can help you with a valuation or the sale of real estate or personal property, give us a call. That's Dave Webb, dlwebb.com.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave, for the update. And if you ever heard the term good day, Dave definitely does that, and a great man with a great business at Webb and Associates. All right, let's go into our next presentation, and this is an introduction I like to keep very simple, as many of you have either heard his presentations at previous Farm Profit seminars, you hear him on our Ag Issues programs, and he provides analysis at 6:52 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon on the markets on 580 WIBW. Darrell Holliday has been a longtime friend and knows his way on how to describe the markets to you in how he likes to do it in his own way. He and Jerry Stoll have been longtime partners up at Country Futures in Frankfurt, and today his presentation is entitled Take a Deep Breath. Sometimes it is difficult, and Darrell Holliday with Country Futures in Frankfurt is joining us now. And Darrell, first thing I got to ask you is, what in the world happened? As you look back, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we expect large grain stocks and poor demand in the middle of 2020, and then bang! What in the world happened? And Darrell, if you can unmute yourself, that would be perfect. And that way, we'll get that here in just a second. Sometimes technology gets the best of all of us. And if you go down, Darrell, below the green screen, and it says the green room, and it says mute. We'll get to that here in just a second. And a reminder, too, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors, and they include KanEquip, who, of course, is our presenting sponsor of our Farm Profit seminars, and also the good folks at Kansas Corn, Kansas Soybean Commission, Webb and Associates, who's presenting this, and we'll mention the other sponsors as well. And Darrell, thanks for joining us once again. And we had all this situation, the pandemic, large grain stocks, poor demand in the middle of 2020, and then boom, here we go. So my question to you is, what in the world happened?
Well, that's a really good question. It's been one of the most phenomenal 15 to 18 months that we've been through in agriculture and economically, politically, and probably we're, I would even suggest to you that we're probably maybe in about the third inning of a 9-inning game, and we'll find out more. We'll talk more about that, but it has been the most dramatic shift in world events that we've ever seen. But I want to stress something that I just want to stress quickly how important it is to kind of reset your brain and kind of rethink the history. Sometimes I feel like this pandemic's going on for 5 years, and we sometimes forget all the things were going on leading up to it. I think we forget that in December of 19, we finally saw the phase 1 agreement with China signed after a long trade war with the Trump administration. And I know, to be honest, I think there were a lot of people that were very skeptical there would ever be a deal. And then even when the deal was signed in December of 19, unfortunately, it didn't get a lot of press, because shortly after that, literally 2 weeks after that, we were made aware of a virus that had surfaced in Wuhan, China. And I don't want to replay all of that, but I think it's important to realize that what happened. I bring this screen up here because I think it's very interesting. A year ago at the Farm Profit seminars and all other Outlook seminars that I did, this was a slide that I shared. I think I always tried to point out that I felt that this was the light at the end of the tunnel. It's part of the reason I was not really bearish grains, even though they got worse before they got better. It's also the reason I didn't do much forward pricing last year in 2020. I'm not sure. I'm not telling you that I'm sitting here back here thinking that I thought corn at that time would go to $6. I'm not trying to say that, but I think it was setting up a situation for a demand-led market. The reason I put this slide up is I shared this with everyone, telling you this was some people that I dealt with in China that had shared with me. They thought this would be the list. This would be how China could fulfill their phase 1 agreement. And it seemed a little out there at $40 billion a year, but in all reality, I'm not saying I just want to share with you that I guess what I'm saying, Greg, is a lot of people have asked in the last 6 months, goodness sakes, did you think this was going to happen? Well, we never know all of what's going to happen. I think it's fair to say that last year at this time, this was what the optimistic side is. Unfortunately, the reason it got lost in the shuffle is in March, the virus reached the United States and the rest of the world, and we all know what happened, and that's really, really important. But we got to remember that we had the China trade deal. At the same time, I think we got to keep in mind that what happened in China is actually very interesting from the standpoint of the reason they were somewhat slow to get to the negotiating table. And I think the Trump administration, probably looking back, understands this. And maybe it's always easy to look back and find these things. But they were slow to negotiate, probably because they were going through a very, very severe bout of African swine fever. And so again, we spent a lot of time talking about that, how it basically cut their hog inventory at least in half. And what happened is that they finally got over that and began to come up with vaccines and biological processes and started to rebuild their hog herd. What happened is they tried to play, if you will, they tried to play this role of, I'm going to be a tough negotiator and we're not going to give in. And the bottom line is, at the same time, once they started growing this hog inventory, they still had these big poultry inventories because they tried to fill in with poultry, that they started draining their grain reserves. And they also, at the same time, when they solved this problem or started trying to build back from African swine fever, one of the things they did was, one of the policies that was very silently talked about, but they eliminated garbage-fed hogs. That's the best way I can contend it. In other words, in China, it was very common before African swine fever to have some hogs in the backyard. Anything from 5 sows, 10 sows, 20 sows. In some cases, they just ate what was left over, scraps from the table, and anything else you could find, if you will. In other words, they weren't eating a full ration of corn and soybean meal. Well, African swine fever hit those areas very badly. It also was the belief in China that was the type of hogs that really spread this disease. And so really what's happened is this African swine fever changed the swine industry dramatically in China and has changed the regulation to where they are it's just basically corn and soybean meal. There's no more garbage-fed hogs. So this all occurred. They drained their grain reserves. And in the end, on December of 2019, they knew they were going to need to buy a lot more beans, a lot more soybeans for soybean meal, soybean oil. They knew they were going to have to buy corn. And this basically started what we call the demand-led market, Greg.
So the demand-led market, asking a simple question, started the demand-led market. So has all this rally, has it been completely a demand-led market?
Well, the reality is what happened is the demand side of the market led this, was the key to the rally clear through, really through January and into February. And it's still the key factor. Okay. Still, we have added some other factors. It's kind of like the momentum in a basketball game or a baseball game. There's things that start a rally. There are things that extend a rally. And we are now got into some other things that have extended this rally and will continue to extend the rally. I mean, you think it's really interesting. You talked about the fact that how we saw such a change in the overall situation from where the psychology was so bad. This chart I've got up right now shows you, if you look at where in May of 2020, everybody knows that May of every year, and they'll do that in this coming May, USDA comes out and says, well, here's what we think the supply demand looks like in the United States for the upcoming year. And then it's always interesting to see, okay, well, let's go out into February and see how that changed from what they said in May. Well, I think it's worth noting that 2021, if you just look at the ending stocks projection, and that'd be the ending stocks for the year we're in now, it has dropped, but just going from May to February, it dropped 54 million tons for basically your coarse grain and your soybean ending stocks. That's a lot. As you can see, that's way different than anything you've ever seen in the last 5 years. Of that 54 million, to answer the question, basically, I would suggest to you that 40 to 45 million of it was because of a huge pickup in demand, not only from China, but from other countries in the world. Because a lot of what we also downplay, don't talk enough about, is the fact that Chinese buying actually spurred additional buying. Remember, there's a lot of consumers in China or in Asia, and when China started buying, people like the Philippines, Japan, Korea, all realized we better start buying. And they liked it when China and the U.S. were sitting here with a trade war. We'll just buy it hand to mouth and keep buying cheaper. But when China stepped in, it actually was somewhat of a Me Too movement, if you will, and that we better get this stuff bought. And that even made the demand even stronger.
Looking at China, and you'd mentioned earlier, have they fulfilled their part of the trade agreement? So I'll ask, do the numbers show that they have?
In my opinion, they do. Now, I can't tell you that everyone, it depends on when you start the calendar year and measure it out. But I think if it's actually interesting. Unfortunately, Greg Dowd is no longer in government, but he was obviously a big part of negotiating this deal. And I think Greg would tell you this has been all of or more than what they hoped for when they signed the first phase one. I think they would like to have been sitting there trying to negotiate phase two and try to even get more. But I would suggest you that they have. Now, whether it's they bought the right amount of this category versus that category, I think as a whole, I would say to you that it'd be hard to argue that they haven't fulfilled the ag side. I want to stress, I'm not going to get into the other items, but on the ag side, I believe they have done that. Now, I think it's also interesting to point out that, when we got into this China situation and got the trade deal, and then we got into the pandemic, and we've learned a lot from the pandemic too. This is another demand-led side of the market that we need to think about. I mean, I asked the question: have we learned much about our consumers as a result of the pandemic? And I would suggest we have learned a lot. What we learned is the consumers will eat at home. Most of you remember when the March and April thing all went down the tubes and everything closed down, everything was locked down in the United States. Every restaurant was closed, every bar was closed. It was like, my gosh. I'll just give you the best example I could give you. Actually, there's two. I guess I give you three up there, but vegetable oil. I think one of the concerns was, well, my gosh, if McDonald's isn't going to be, if you will, not going to be frying French fries or deep fat frying French fries, well, what in the world are we going to use soybean oil for? What are we going to use vegetable oil for? Well, what we forgot is the consumer goes home and they all buy vegetable oil because they still want to have French fries and they still want to bake. They still want to cook. In reality, went through more volume. Probably, I think one of the best examples for understanding how agriculture fared in this from a consumer standpoint is to look at beer sales. Real interesting. I happened to watch in detail even in October, November, because I was trying to study the phenomenons of what was going on with the consumer, and happened to catch a very long, lengthy interview with the CEO that they sell Blue Moon. And he was in October talking about how Blue Moon beer sales had been up since March, up 14% versus the year ago. And they asked directly to him, the interviewer said, how could that possibly be with the pandemic and all of what is going on? How in the world could you possibly? You're not selling anything at the bars and restaurants. And his comment was, "Oh, the categories of sales have changed dramatically, but the consumer has come to realize the value of a 6-pack of Blue Moon versus buying one Blue Moon at the restaurant." And he very much pointed this out. And therefore, the consumers are consuming more volume and seeing the value. Well, that's exactly what happened to the meat sector. That's what happened to soybean oil or the vegetable oil sector. It's definitely in the meat side, it's become a different type of distribution. It took a little while to understand that the cuts have to be a little bit different. But in all reality, the consumer consumed more volume. We'll talk more about that when we get to the meat side too. But also the other problem is agriculture now understands how important the processing companies are to success. I mean, we went through a real problem. Not obviously the most obvious one was the packing plants, but we also had ethanol plants that struggled for workers. They struggled with crushing plants, all those things that we dealt with. It's going to already having long-term impact. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the cattle side of things, but this is having a long-term impact on that we have not got through yet. We have not pushed our way through this, and it's going to result in more investment in technology by some of these large companies. They have seen what the demand side of this business will be too, but if they can't process, then it hurts them. And of course, in the cattle side, and the beef industry, and in the pork side, at times, it has been to be honest with you, the producer of that has really suffered. And I think the country learned a lot about the hypocrisy of the word essential workers. I found it interesting last spring, March, April, and May, when we were struggling with packing plants that couldn't process or fab plants that couldn't go, when we would have people that were sitting behind their screen, as I am tonight, yelling and screaming that we need to get them essential work. We need to get those packing plant workers in the plants and get them to work. I was the guy standing back listening going, man, that's easy to say when you're sitting at home and haven't left your house for 60 days. Get those, quote, essential workers to work. I think those essential workers realize now how much leverage they have. And I think the industry has not solved that problem long term. And we're dealing with it once again, as we'll talk about more. Sometimes I like to raise the questions. I found it hypocritical at times, and yet at the same time, we needed them obviously for food. I knew there was everybody. I don't disagree they weren't essential. I just think it was real easy when you haven't left home for 60 days to be critical of people who wouldn't go to work on a Monday because of fear of the virus. The political mess also that we're seeing, I think, is also worth pointing out that this Green New Deal. I just want to point out some things. I know that Perry talked a little bit about this. I just want to point out that not all of this. It's real easy to look at the Green New Deal and say this is going to be really positive for agriculture. Well, I think it's going to be very positive near term because I think there'll be positiveness on biofuels, but it may feel good long term, but it may not feel so good long term. I think we ought to be we're going to see the environmental regulation will ramp back up. Just remember that, if you will, the global warming or climate change activists don't really see biofuels as a big deal. They may act like now they want to do it, but in the end, they don't want a combustion engine. Okay. They don't want, you say, well, we got to have corn to feed the cattle. They don't want you eating any meat. Okay. So let's be very clear about how that is, where we are in that. Okay. So I just would warn you to be careful. It's also interesting to note that this environmental regulation we're going to see, actually, I could see the U.S. government, depends on how things go politically in the next election. And if this trend continues for the next 3 or 4 years, we'll find the agriculture on the defensive. But I also think the U.S. government may legislate themselves right into much higher prices. As a matter of fact, I find it fascinating that if we go into a drought situation this year, I would suggest to you that some of this talk about a Green New Deal may go right down the drain, because we will be talking about prices they won't imagine, because we will get into such an inflationary commodity spend, you won't believe it, and we'll talk once more about that. The attack on USDA spending, Perry talked about that, how it will be different. There's no doubt we're going to see means testing. I'm going to suggest to you that we'll see means testing on crop insurance or crop insurance subsidies if we don't see things reverse themselves in the next 12 to 14 months. There's a lot on the line. Keep in mind, agriculture received a tremendous amount of money, CFAP money. We all know that. And PPP money because of the virus. I'm not really going to spend much time on that, but it had a significant impact on the financial conditions that Perry was talking about. Tremendous. So have the higher prices. But let's don't forget that down the road, the bottom line is everybody got that in the economy. And at some point, you'll pay the piper for this at some point. No question about that. You're going to play it with higher inflation levels. higher interest rates or something's going to give, or you're just going to continue to print money. To me, you'll go one of two ways. You either the Fed steps back and says, wait a minute, we can't keep doing this. We've got to pull back a little bit, and that will hurt. That will certainly have an impact on interest rates. Or secondly, you just keep printing money at such an alarming pace that your currency goes to absolute crap. And if any of you have not studied Argentina, for example, that's a good one. Brazil's also good examples of where they run up so much debt that their currency becomes worthless, so they have to start a new currency. Let's hope that's not where the U.S. is going. But I want to be very clear. That is a spiral that this type of spending could get us on if that continued and with no check in place over the next, say, 10 years.
Here's a question that I have for you, Daryl. As we look at it, and of course we're in the planting season right now, are all of the sectors of the grain markets, are they competing for acres?
I think they are. I mean, this is interesting because this is I think what this demand-led market got us into some really tighter stocks, and there's nothing more fun than demand-led markets. I guess I should probably clarify what I mean by demand-led, in that this was not we had a horrible drought in the United States last year rally. Okay. It's not oh my God, they couldn't produce any soybeans in Brazil, so look where we're at in soybeans. No, that's not correct. Let's be clear. Brazil is harvesting a record soybean crop right now of 135 million tons. That's a record by 12 million tons. Okay. Yes, some would say maybe last year's U.S. crop was a little disappointing when it was all said and done, but it wasn't a bad crop. That would be a very bad assessment. This is a demand-led market. The reason there's so much fun is when demand-led gets to this level and you get the stocks tight enough, what happens is we now get back to what we used to see, these old-fashioned spring rallies, in where the markets are all competing for acres. In other words, cotton got to levels of 85 and let's say 80 and 85 cents. That's a high enough price. That's wanting acres. We all know what sorghum has done. Back in January and February, I doing a couple presentations, and I told people I think Kansas corn acres will be down this year. And I had people in the crowd go, "You got to be kidding me! You're crazy. Why would they go down? We're seeing 4 or 5 headed to $6 corn, and you think we're going to plant less corn?" Well, sure enough, the intentions report indicated not only Kansas would, but even parts of the Corn Belt. But I think the reason Kansas was an easy call is because sorghum acres were going to take over a large amount of those acres, basically dry land corn acres in the western part of the state. Corn and soybean values rallied 60, 70. The reality is now we have seen corn values. This is real interesting. I've just looked at this today. Since July of 20, officially today, corn has doubled in value. That didn't happen until today's move, but we have officially doubled in value since July of 20. That's almost, and that was not drought related. So yes, we are seeing it's making for an interesting spring, and one that we're going to continue to see. And as you look at we get the March intention report. It's real interesting how the principal crop acres, we went from 310 last year to 316. You take all the crop acres, add them together, just say, well, the pie is basically 6 million acres larger. Okay, that's interesting to note. There were tons of people that thought it'd be 8 to 9, and to be honest with you, I thought it'd be between 7 and 8. But what we found is most major states last year, what I call major ag states, planted all the acres they could, except for a couple of 2 or 3 states, such as North Dakota, South Dakota, and parts of Minnesota. That's what we call the prevented plant capital of the world. They PP'd because the acres prices were so bad last year, they PP'd it. Of course, you're not supposed to prevent plant for that reason, and that's the reason we have a new law in place in insurance. We won't spend any time on that, but in my opinion, prevent plant's one of the biggest frauds in crop insurance. That'll get me in trouble, I'm sure, get that recorded. But it's been somewhat changed this year. But the reality is that's really the only areas in which we had significant acres that didn't get planted. There were others in other states, but that's the reason that's very important is that's why we only saw the market. I tell you, the industry was hoping there'd be 10 million more total crop acres. And what's interesting is you look at this table, this is the principal crops, and it's where did you see the increases? And you can see North and South Dakota up 10.6%, North Dakota 7.9%. in South Dakota. Why is that important? Why is it important to point that out? Because of the fact those are not high yield areas. You increase corn acres in Illinois 10%, you're going to bring in some volume. Okay, you're going to bring in yield. To be honest, North Dakota, especially, they add more corn or bean acres, their yields will go down. They're not high yield states. They have, not to mention, they're unfortunately right in the middle of one of the worst droughts they've had over at this time of the year in several years. So that may change. It's worth noting that to me is why you can't sit there and be real optimistic U.S. yields with that expanded deal. Now the corn specifically, we've seen extremely strong basis levels in the U.S. because we have extremely strong demand. The intentions report put out 91.1 million acres, but I really would guess that we'll still get above 92, but that's just not that many. That's an increase of about 1.2 million acres. Once again, that's an increase of 1.2 million. All of that increase is somewhere else. It's in what I would call the fringe acres. And that is not where the yields are. The reality is China purchases of U.S. corn have been the game changer. But now we have another issue that we have the situation in the Brazilian safrinha crop is now could be the next game changer.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that because if people hear your analysis at especially 652, you mentioned safrinha crop very a lot in this case. Mm-hmm. So why is there so much interest in this Brazilian safrinha crop?
Well, it's difficult. I feel bad because sometimes on the radio you have to do things in 2 minutes, and sometimes so tonight you get to at least take 2 or 3 minutes and explain, because I don't think I'm a corn producer in Donovan County. I don't give a rippity roar about the Brazilian safrinha crop. I mean, I do, but I want to know why I should and what goes on there. We've got to remember that Brazil plants their big crop is soybeans, and they do put in a first crop of corn, and it's usually harvested in February. Just to give you some quick numbers, this year that crop, that's what we call the first crop, was 23.6 million tons of corn. That was a disappointing crop. They would like to have seen 27 or 28 million. But their big crop of corn is the corn that goes in right after the early soybeans that go in Mato Grosso. Those Mato Grossos are huge. Just give you an idea. Sometimes we talk about Mato Grosso and go, well, how small a little state is that? Well, geographically, it's the size of Texas, okay? And they grow a lot of soybeans. They grow a lot of corn. But they tend to put this corn in right after they get done harvesting soybeans. What happened to them, and Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Paraná, all major soybean and corn growing areas. What happened is it got really wet. The soybean season ended up being wetter than they'd like it to be. Okay, it ended up with a good crop because they planted so many more acres. But they need to get this corn in. Usually what's known as the drop dead date in the safrinha crop in all those states after the beans is March 10th. Because anytime after March 10th, most of the time they wouldn't even plant it. Well, this year they did. They planted over half the crop after March 10th, which actually was about 65%. Why did they still go ahead and plant it? Because corn was $5. That'd be the reason. Okay, so the reality is the reason they want it in by March 10th, and they really like it in by February, is that they need it to be through the reproductive and critical stage by May, because traditionally they have somewhat of a monsoonal season, and then they have what we call a dry season. You'll see that in lots of countries. Their dry season starts in May. And mainly May and early June, and then that's kind of it. But it is, even in a good year, it is dry in May. What happened is all that went in late, and so their critical development time is May, will start here in the first part of May. And unfortunately, what's happened to them is they got it in, it had been wet, they got in, and Mato Grosso has been the driest, this stretch from the last 50 days has been the driest stretch in 40 years for that same time period. The reason this is important is that USDA and others have had the safrinha crop at 85 million tons. That's their big crop. Generally, the safrinha crop is usually 2 to 3 times larger than the first crop. Okay, why is this important? What's happened is because they didn't have Brazil's corn prices, they use a tremendous amount of corn in Brazil. We forget they're major poultry producers, they're major ethanol users, they're major beef producers, okay? They use a tremendous amount of corn, but they do export 20 to 25, 30 million tons, depending on the size, but it'll all come out of the safrinha crop. And what happened is their corn has gotten so tight, they have such high demand that they just sucked right through the 23.6 like it was nothing there. As a matter of fact, I've had to import corn from Argentina, which is not unusual. But if they could come back and get an 85 million ton safrinha crop, then they would, with what has happened during that lapse of time, their corn prices have been over $7 for 2 months because of the fact that they are so tight supply of corn. So what's going to happen is if this crop decreases down to the 70, let's just say 70 to 72 million area or either side of it, what's going to happen is their prices are going to stay so high and the domestic market will take it all and they will literally export very little corn other than what's on the board right now. And what happens if that corn stays elevated at 6.50, 7.5 in Brazil, all of a sudden the U.S. price, which seems high, is cheap. And so you'll see the people who have traditionally bought from Brazil, let's say in June and July, off the safrinha crop, a lot of them will be forced to come to the United States. They could, obviously Ukraine will have some too, but really a lot of those traditional markets are for the U.S. And the reality is that's what's happening now. That's why you've seen this last surge in corn, and the safrinha crop has now become the next game changer. If that becomes a crop of 70 or less, we're going to see crop prices elevated for a long time, and it'll have a long-term impact as a whole. When you look at the corn acres in the United States, you can see we only went up 300,000 based upon intentions. And once again, I want to point out, notice how the North and South Dakota up, 69.2% change in. So when you tell me you went up 300,000 acres, but look at all the states that went down: Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Well, what'd they do? Well, they're going to plant beans. We don't know. When it's all said and done, they'll go back and forth. But the reality is, take Illinois, for example. Last year, they planted corn and beans. They had 10.9 million, or they had about 11.2 million acres of corn last year. Okay. They planted all they could. When you add the corn and soybeans together, they didn't have any vacant acres, not like they'd had in 2019. So finding more acres in those states, it's all you're really doing is just fighting over the pie. The pie is so big. The pie in Illinois is about 20 million acres. So what are you going to? That's what it was last year. The pie didn't get any bigger. The pie got bigger in places like North and South Dakota, where they had planted so many acres. So you expanded the acres in North and South Dakota. That's all well and good, but that ain't 180 bushel corn country. That's not even 140 bushel corn country. And I suggest you the acres they're putting in won't even be 5-year average North and South Dakota yields. That's why bumping this yield up is a very, very hard thing to do as a whole. Back in January, after we saw what came down the pike, and keep in mind in November and January, USDA did start lowering the yield from last year, but again, it was still a pretty decent corn and bean crop. But when you saw the demand occur, I put this in a newsletter a long time ago that we would see spot corn prices go to 625 or better. Well, today that's where we hit it, and this was because of looking at where the projected stocks to use ratio is. I will admit to you that it may actually get worse than this, and we may go higher than this, because this was not based upon the safrinha crop failing. If the safrinha crop fails, we've got more upside that could easily take the stock to use ratio down to about 8. If you look along the bottom of that graph and you kind of line it up and go down to about 8% stock to use ratio, you would see the corn price go up near $7. And I think that's certainly in the cards and certainly a possibility.
Hey, Daryl, let me ask you something real quick. You had talked about the location as to where everything was, but I wanted to ask you about corn, the yield itself, and USDA has projected 180 as far as the average. What do you think of that number?
Well, let's look at this right here. This is the acreage. Okay, forget even the North and South Dakota thing for a little bit, the fringe acres. when you stand back, I mean, if you just kind of get back from your screen and go, well, let's look at that. That's the corn yields back to 1991. And if you concentrate on the last 8 to 10 years, I would suggest, I said this a year ago, the corn yield looks to me to be flattening out in the U.S. I think that's fair to say. Now, what happens when you get corn at $5 and $6 and you increase nutrient use and maybe we do, I don't know, we put more on, I don't know, more fungicide. I don't know if you could put more fungicide on than we've been in the last 2 or 3 years because it's been increased use. Here's my point. If you look at last year's yield of 172, and I don't want to get too depth with this because I spent too much time on it a year ago and it's running, but my point is, so I'm not a real believer in the 172, 167.5. I've never believed that. I'll just make this comment, and many of you I've talked to over the last couple of years, the 167.5 in 2019, I think was the most overstated number in the history of USDA NAS for yield. And I think what happened to them is they got they thought the corn, in 2019, the corn crop was not very daggum good, and they've kept putting out numbers that were too high. And what got them is they kept running with what you and I would call a standard test weight. And when they got into the stocks numbers this year, at the end of the year and started measuring the stocks, they went, oh my God, this corn's not here. What happened? Well, it's not here because you guys were using 56 and 58 pound test corn. In reality, we had a tremendous amount of 48, 50, and 51 pound test corn. And that's what we raised as bushels or pounds, not bushels. And so I personally think the difference between last year and the year before much wider than 5 bushels the acre. My point is last year's corn went in very, very well. It was one of the fastest planted crops we've ever had. It was highly rated. We did have the problems that occurred, in July up in Iowa. We got dry in northwest Iowa and those types of things. But my point is last year was a very highly rated crop through most of the year. And we still only did 172. I think it's when you can now say, okay, let's expand these acres and let's take it into areas that are not, they're not central Illinois, who last year was well over 200 bushels the acre. Then how do you set I just think it's very difficult to sit there and write down 180 bushels this year. Now, could we do that? Sure, we could do that. But I think it's really hard for me to believe that you will do that. If you said 176, I go, okay, that's a reasonable number, although I think that's still plenty high. The reason that's important is if you even raise the acres up to 92 million and the yield's 176, this is going back to this before, you can see our stocks, we're getting our stock down to levels that you're not going to see. You could do the math and figure out if the demand stays as good as it is, you will not grow stocks if the yield's 176. Very minimally, if you do at all. And that's why I think these corn prices are here to stay for quite a while because of that. And once again, it shows the next chart shows you what happened with the corn exports, this blow up, and a lot of it being China. And one of the things I wanted to point out is when we talk about the corn sales exports to China, look at, this is how much we shipped to them just as of last week. So cumulatively, just in the big picture, look, that's 10 million tons that we shipped to corn. Well, how much have we shipped last year and the last, the previous year and the 5-year average? Nothing, basically. Zero. On top of that, look at this. This is how much is left that we need to ship that we sold them. So if you add the 10 million we always shipped them and the 14 million we got left to, you can do some quick stuff in your head and go, man, that's 24 million tons of corn. What's interesting about that is just to give you how USDA thinks, they are currently projecting that the total corn imports for China in the crop year will be 24 million tons. Well, we've sold them 24 million. The United States, that doesn't even count what they've brought from Ukraine and other countries, although most of it is from Ukraine, but some from Brazil. The point being, USDA still believes that China is either going to cancel some of these sales and not take them, or they're going to roll some of them in new crop. Well, I believe some will be thrown in new crop. But this takes me back to your question, Greg, on the Brazilian safrinha crop. China is not going to cancel any of these sales if that's the crop, or these purchases, if that safrinha crop falls on its rear end. And the reality is they're already taking about 40 I'm going to say they're taking 1 million tons a week every week right now. And so they're not going, I still don't think that, I think they might roll 1 million or 2 into new crop, but in the end, they'll still take it. So I think that's kind of where we are. This is a chart of the corn futures. Obviously, that's the point telling you that they've doubled, and it's kind of the most amazing trend you've ever seen, and really with no stop. I mentioned on that chart that I thought they would go to 6.25 back in January. We've hit that. I do think we are in an area now, the 625, 640 area. We might pause for a little bit if we start putting this crop in the United States. We start planting next week and get going a little better, and that topology gets a little better. You could see the market set back a little bit, but this is still the old crop's driven by demand. We're still using a lot of demand. Ethanol's picking back up. I don't really see much correction, but it could it's, this move up has always been, we move up, then we correct. We move up, and then we correct. And that's a perfect example of a demand-led market. And that's the story on corn, which is still the basis for the strength or overall backbone of this market.
Well, let's get into soybeans. And you look at the soybean numbers, Daryl, they really have never been tighter, have they?
No, they really have not. I mean, we could go back to years and say that we've had tighter ending stocks, but not relative to the percentage as a percent of what we use. No. When you're looking at any stocks that are going to be under 3% of your total use, they've never been tighter. Now, we've been higher in the market. We've seen 18, but remember, back when we went to $18, $19, we were going that area, and we're not that far from it, which, by the way, if you haven't heard tonight, May beans did go over the $15 level. But back then, we didn't have a South America, we didn't have a Brazil growing 135 million tons. They were growing 105. So and the vegetable oil demand has really been the key driver in this thing. Palm oil, canola oil, soybean oil, sun oil, all just, the world needs oil. Some of that's the demand from biodiesel too, but I don't want to overstate that. I still will tell you that the strength is in just as we talked about it, the consumer use of vegetable oil is very, very high. I would once again ask, how do you project 52 bushels an acre for soybeans? We'll look at that deal. I think the soybeans will grab a lot of these fringe acres, and that's exactly, we saw the bigger increase in acres in soybeans in the March intensive report, but once again, we're seeing some in the Corn Belt, but most of them are what I would call the fringe, and you're sitting there depending on some yields that maybe don't make sense. U.S. exports are at a record pace, but we've done all we can. People get disappointed on a weekly basis when they talk about, well, we haven't sold much. We don't have much more to sell. The reality is the crush industry is taking this market. The domestic crush industry has to have the beans that are left, and the basis levels represent that. We're seeing unprecedented basis levels for both soybeans and the soybean oil. There have been reports in the last couple of days of soybean oil in the middle part of Illinois trading at 12 cents over the futures market. And you might go, well, what does that mean? That's the basis. Well, the point of that is we've never seen basis levels like that for soybean oil ever. We've seen soybean oil go to 70 cents, but we didn't see the basis, 5 and 10 cents over the futures. That's just an indication of extremely strong near-term demand. What has happened is there's a lot of this industry, a lot of the end users are very concerned that the beans are getting so tight in supply, the basis for beans is so strong and the price is so strong that at some point the crushers may go, you know what, we can't do it. And there are some crushers in some parts of this country right now that if you call them and say, I want to book some soybean meal for July, I need to use, I'm a hog producer, I'm a poultry producer, I need some soybean meal, I want to book it. They would say, you know what, we'll book it to you as long as you can bring us the 50,000 bushels of beans to crush. Because we're not even going to quote you a price right now because we don't know what those beans are going to cost us. And we're not going to take the chance that. And you go, well, they can buy them on the board. Yes, they can buy them on the board, but they don't know what the basis is going to be because there's indications to spots of Indiana where they're paying $1 over to get soybeans. That's an incredibly high basis. And that's what's going to ration. So soybean meal could go through the same thing when it goes there. The soybean acres, you can see that was where the jump was. We put basically 4.3 in the intention million up. So again, look at the blues. Now we did see it in the Midwest, but once again, 20% increase in North Dakota and 15% in South Dakota. I'm not saying they can't raise raise beans, but if you've never studied the yield numbers of the United States, even in good years, that Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and even northern Iowa will never ever touch Illinois. They just don't have the daylight hours. You just can't grow. It's just a physiological, biological reality. You're not going to grow those 80 and 90 bushel beans in North Dakota. Not going to happen. Okay, and you're not going to get a statewide yield in North Dakota of 68 bushel the acre like you might in Illinois. That's really the point that I want to make, and why it becomes really hard. So again, you look at the chart of yield. Well, the problem with using 52 is you're just sitting there going, we're going to expand acres 4 million acres, and we're going to see a record yield. That's a little hard for me to put down. It's kind of like on the corn. If you're going to put in 180, I'd be more likely to put in 172 than I would 180 or one. And beans, rather than putting 52, I'd be more likely. I think there's a better chance you have 49. My point is, there's just about no better chance than those two that we get to that level. Could we? Sure, we could. But will we? I think it's really hard to sit here and say that. And his reality is, if the yield's at 50 or 51, those acres go up. In reality, we're still looking at a pretty tight stock situation next year because of these exports. And that's the story. It's just incredible. The demand that we're seeing out, not only China, and once again, China gets all the press when it comes to soybeans, and they have been extremely good buyers. They still bought 60 to 70%. They're back to buying 67% of the U.S. exports, not crop. Well, but we shouldn't dismiss the fact that there's a lot of other countries that really need U.S. soybeans and soybean meal, and they've been big buyers also because there's this big demand for protein and vegetable oil across the world at this point in time, anyway. And once again, you can see you're talking about under 3% as the stock to use ratio, extremely low numbers when we get to the end of the year. There's your chart of soybeans. That's the soybean continuous chart. Again, they haven't doubled in price, but they've certainly, you're talking about a major increase because, like I said, they hit $15 tonight. So we've basically gone from July of last year at $9. Today we're at $15, so we put $6 on beans. Broke through a lot of resistance levels. The only thing left above us right now is that 11, 12, 13 drought years that we saw. Okay, and there's the soybean oil. Some people don't. We actually have seen soybean oil, like I said, above 70 before, but today's 60 took a lot of it out. Went up against that.
Hey, Daryl, we got a quick question actually from David Dremel. What percentage should or would you recommend that be priced at this time?
New crop. I assume he's asking new crop, and the answer
I would assume the same.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I have not recommended anything for beans or corn new crop. Now, and those who have probably known me for quite a while would go, my gosh. Daryl Holiday has passed up $5.25 new crop December corn and $13 November beans. I cannot believe that to be true, but that is true. Have not priced any at all. I believe. I'm trying to monitor things, of course, on the safrinha crop very, very closely, but I believe that I will probably go in with the first stage of new crop corn pricing, some around that 548 to 555 area. I have not decided at this point in time, and there will be opportunities. I want to stress: you got to be careful. You sound like the bulls are the sheetrock's starting to fall from the ceiling because we got horns growing, so I don't think we'll never have another bad day. We will have bad days. We've had bad. I told people this winter, you'll have days when you'll go, oh my God, I've stored all my corn or my beans or everything I've had on storage, and I've watched it go down 50 cents, and but it will come back because these are demand-led markets. And at this point in stage, I think we will have to take advantage of it, and I think it's one of those opportunities that will be something we can take advantage of for 2 to 3 years out, but not yet, in my opinion. So I've done none at this point in time, and so I guess the answer is 0. And that's also true of wheat. I have not recommended any new crop pricing of wheat. That doesn't mean does that mean that people that I know or have used our brokerage service have not priced some new crop? Oh, absolutely, they have, but not upon my recommendation, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's always a time to say that's enough. I'm going to put some money in my pocket. But at this point in time, I have not recommended it at this time, and so really good question.
You stole a little bit of my thunder on that first bullet point on my next question. Have they been a follower, or are we seeing some fundamentals starting to change in that market?
A few fundamentals, but the reality is this wheat market's been a follower. The overall fundamentals are still burdensome. But what happened that really helped? Once again, we got to go to China. The number one producer of wheat in the world is China. Okay, we always got to remember that. And the number one holder of stocks by country, the country that holds the most stocks of wheat in the world is China. Okay. And what happened is when this corn got to going crazy and they had effort, they're trying to get the trade deal done and they were draining stocks. They drained their stocks of corn. They went, we got to feed these hogs. So they started. They have even demand. They used to not. They actually used to limit the amount of wheat that could be used in feed for hogs. They've taken some of those limits off recently because they released 25 million tons of wheat out of their reserve to be used for feed. Wouldn't all have to go to hogs, but both wheat and rice. So they're in the process of building back their wheat reserves. So that's a positive. But once again, you'd have to argue that wheat was the follower there because that was because of the huge demand and use of corn. The reality is there's a lot of I think the wheat fundamentals that are at least supportive is, I think we talked about the North and South Dakota dryness and in the Canadian prairies. And we know we're dry in the Southwest United States. We had dryness last year in Europe that reduced their crop, but they haven't totally recovered, especially from Germany east over to Ukraine and Russia. So the reality is we are seeing some things happen that are concerning about the wheat crop in the Northern Hemisphere, but it doesn't mean that 2 weeks or 2 months of really good weather, things couldn't be better, that we couldn't see a better crop. But I'm just not, I'm right now just kind of neutral on the Kansas wheat crop, the hardwood winter wheat crop. I think there'll be some good wheat, but I think there'll be areas you go, just about average. What happened in Russia is very interesting. This winter, late fall and winter, their wheat and flour prices inside Russia just skyrocketed. Some of that's the inflationary mood. Some of that's the hoarding, all kinds of things. And they had exported wheat. They always export. They're the leading exporter of wheat. And the government became real concerned about that. So that's when they decided basically to start taxing some exports to try to slow down the export. They still have that tax policy in place. What they're waiting to see is how good their winter wheat and spring wheat crops are. But they're going to keep those in place for a while. And so I think that's going to be positive for U.S. Wheat as we get into our new crop. The problem is we're going to see some of that wheat out west, the western parts of the hardwood winter area, is going to be gobbled up and used in the feed business, feeding cattle. So that'll be something that'll trying to stem some of the costs of corn. So I think in reality, though, that's the wheat following corn. But but I will say there are a few areas that we should. I think China, they're lowering of their reserves, and also the Russian wheat tax policy is also supportive. We need to watch Eastern Europe and Eastern Europe. If we don't see more moisture come into that area, then wheat will have its day of $7 and $8. But I think it's going to take that for us to get to those levels. You can see the wheat acres did go up. Winter wheat acres went up in the United States for the first time in a long time. Our wheat exports are better, but to say they're good would be pretty much a stretch. You can see that the wheat, our stocks as a whole are still, we're over 35% stocks to use ratio. It's not horrible. We've been worse, but it's just not that good improvement. You've seen the world stocks minus China. You can see that we still have plenty of stocks in the world, even when you take out China. So that area is, I just wish the demand was better, I guess, as a whole. But it's still not bad. Wheat as a whole has gone up dramatically. Basically, it went from $4.25 up to $6.50. That's a good run. It did set back, as we know, and it's come back. I think that my general opinion is you get wheat up to that September Kansas City wheat even near that 675 area. If you haven't done any pricing, I have not done any, but I think that would be a good place to get started pricing new crop wheat for September for this year.
Darrell, we haven't had a chance to mention what's been going on as far as the cattle market, and of course, it's safe to say that no industry has gone through probably more havoc than we've seen in the last 18 months. And you add in the packing plant fires and everything else, and what we've seen in the beef industry. So through all this chaos, where are we standing right now?
Well, I'm going to give you a little different slant on cattle than you maybe will have expected. I mean, that some of you did. Yes, it's been one of the most difficult years in livestock, poultry, and meat business. To be honest with you, if it wasn't for CFAP money, where would the cattle business been last year? Let's be honest about that. Okay. And you even personally, those who have cattle know what I'm talking about. That was significant money. I mean, shoot, we have cattle in this country that got CFAP money 3 times, the same cattle, basically, 2 to 3 times. And so and even with that, it's been a tough go. What's difficult for me to talk about is the fact that the good news is that consumers have discovered a great value in beef. The demand is extremely solid. I was told today, I'm going to share a little story, told today, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but the sources, because I don't follow it well enough. Most of you have followed lumber prices. I mean, they've gone from $3 to $4 a board foot to $13 a board foot, okay, on the future side. But I've also been told that many of the producers of lumber, or the tree growers and cutters, are experiencing extremely low prices relative to that. And why is that? Well, I found fascinating. It's the same story you're going to hear from me on the beef industry. It's really, I think we've now hit a stage in the beef industry that's the most concerning that I've ever seen. And it concerns me that we don't hear some of our organizations talking more about it, because we're seeing extremely good demand. I'm going to skip ahead to a chart I want to show something. This is the choice cutout value. I want you to pay attention to the green line is the choice cutout value. It's a number, it's what wholesale beef, choice beef is bringing on a daily basis. I want you to notice that today it went over 280. So this is last week's chart. But we went over 280 today. What I want you to look at is come back down there to the 266 level, which is under. I want everybody to realize that in all reality, until last year's debacle in April and May when we couldn't kill any cattle, we had never seen the choice cutout ever go above 266. Ever. And it went to 480. And this year we went right through 266 again, and we're at 280. Yet look where we are in the cash market. In other words, we are truly finding out that we sell cattle and packers sell beef. And those are 2 different markets. And my big concern in the big picture I don't want to be, but I'm a guy who tells you the truth what I think. And it doesn't mean it's right, but I'm telling you what I think. The reality is the concentration, consolidation in the packing process industry is now clearly hurting the beef industry in this way. Think about this. The market, Greg, is supposed to be sending a signal right all the way through. If the beef market, if the demand isn't very good, it's supposed to, it should show that beef prices are lower, cattle prices will be lower, calf prices will be lower, and the cow-calf man goes, oh my God, we better get rid of some cows. We got to quit expanding. That's how the signals should run down the chain. We know it doesn't work perfectly, but that's how it should. Let me give you an example. Soybean oil is basically at record highs. Soybeans, soy meal is not at record highs. Soybeans are over $15. The producer is getting $15. And what does that signal? Grow more beans. Okay? Well, if you think about this, the cutout value is telling us, oh my God, the demand is phenomenal. We've never been here. This is the second highest we've ever been, and last year's was quirky and stupid. I mean, it was because our slaughter was half. And what it's telling you is, it's signaling the demand for beef is phenomenal. Yet the packers' margins are so big, the signal to the cattle producer is beef demand is terrible. As a matter of fact, you ought to be liquidating your cow herd because calves aren't worth it. You can't make money. People that think the cow man can make any money at $1.50 calves has no idea what the costs are out there in the country. No any idea. It will not work. The return on assets is terrible. And so what happens is you're telling them to liquidate their cows. And you know what? That's what we're doing. Yet the demand for beef is as strong as ever. And that's what discourages me the most. It's real simple. Packer margins have exploded in the last 18 months and really in the last year. Now, I'll admit to you, it takes more for a packer to run every year, every day, because the COVID stuff is really, really, really tough. Okay. We will see tighter supplies down the road. We still have plenty of cattle up front. We have plenty, but the demand's good enough. But the reality is long-term, the supply risk also is that we may have this drought concern in the plains this spring. If we have that drought in Southwest move up into the plains, it won't be good. It will not be very good at all. We'll put more cattle. And yet we continue to build a futures market that puts a big premium in the deferred cattle. And I always like to remind people, you can't pick a bull up by its tail, meaning we keep thinking it's all going to get, it's just going to get better. It's going to get better. Don't worry, it'll get better. I know we're only getting our summer highs or spring high was only 122. Okay. Well, it's going to get better by November. Well, we were told it was going to get better. And the reality is we're not concentrating on what really has happened here. This is what I want you to look at. The cutout is here. All right. 280 today. Cash price is 122. I want you to look at this packer margin. Packer margins are over $700 compared to normal of $175, or I'll even give you $200. It's $600 a head or 40. My point is this: if instead of cash cattle bringing 120, they were bringing, if you use the 5-year average margins, packer margins, they would be bringing what? 162. Do you think anybody would have a problem with that that's feeding cattle today? I would say no, even with high-priced corn. Now, I know that we're not going to see margins down to $200 because of the fact that we have more costs. But let's suppose the costs of the plant have doubled. I don't think they probably have. But the reality is that still means that the margins today would be still $350 to $400 a head. And that's what's discouraging, is we're not getting the true signal of beef demand and price. And in reality, there's our cash price for cattle. And that's sad. That's a sad story. And I wish I had better. The bottom line is cattle feeders don't have any leverage. They sell way too many cattle formula. They give packers. Reality is we have formula cattle, or cattle that go to a feed yard, and when they land at the feed yard, we know which packer's buying. That doesn't mean you can't sell your cattle on grid or anything like that. That's not formula cattle. Formula cattle are cattle that when they walk in the door of the feed yard and back up to the chute, we know which packer's getting them. That's the only true formulas we have out in that industry. There's a lot of people that sell on a Cargill grid, a Tyson grid, lots of things, but they negotiate week to week. But there's 67% of the cattle in this country in the Southern Plains is sold on formula. And so the packers don't have to go get them. And what the formula people feel really good about it, because they get more money for the cattle, but what they don't realize is because they don't have to negotiate for the cattle, in the end, the overall cattle price and the margins have gone up. And that's the reality. And I don't know when we'll get that back, Greg. My problem is I do not know when we can get that back. We ever get the leverage back, we'll see some strength. But I don't see, I guess I can't, until you get more people competing for cattle, more packing plants, a little more facilities, or a little fewer numbers, we're not going to see that happen. So the beef cows numbers, so demand is really good and we're lowering beef cows. That sounds good. Demand's really good, let's lower the calf crop. Record demand for beef. Doesn't matter. It don't matter. You can grab Cattle-Fax's beef export index. There isn't a demand measurement that doesn't tell you. It says it's record beef demand in the world. Yeah, guess what signal we're giving our cow calf man? We need fewer of them. No, we need more of them. But the way the market's set up gives us trouble. And I know that's a little strong, but I did want to make the point. As you can see, as a whole, from the disaster last spring, we've rallied, and we've been in an uptrend. But how does that uptrend look like what the choice cutout value did? And look what the beef has done. Oops, sorry, I got those in there. Whoops. And feeder cattle, I'll end with feeder cattle because I know we got people that run grass cattle, we got people background cattle. I just want to stress to you, if you have not done the math and not said, how in the world can they pay $153 for cattle in August, feeder cattle, if corn ends up being $6.50? Corn in Western Kansas today at the feed yard at Dodge City, given where we closed today, is going to be about $7.10 a bushel. You need it. Now, I'm not, again, it may come down but the reality is we're not coming down for a while. You need to run the cost of gain and realize that we're pricing in about $130 a head loss if you buy the cattle on the board and you buy the corn and you sell the futures versus where December cattle are. That will not stand, Greg. When we get to August, either the December cattle will be a lot higher or August feeders will be a lot lower or corn's going to come down. We cannot, the industry will not stand and operate with $130 loss margin going into the feedlot. They might for 40 or 50, but they won't do 130. And so I just remember that we made a lot of recommendations for feeder cattle hedges over the last month. Got a lot of them on in August above 160, a lot of them above 155. We even did some done, and I'm telling you, even today when August feeders closed the day, did I put August feeders on? I don't know if I did. Yeah, I did. Even at 152, 53, I would suggest you some protection is probably in line, just because either that or you need to own corn. And I would suggest selling the feeders is a better way, or getting some protection, buying puts or something on any type of rallies at all. I just simply because I'm still really think that the upside in corn is still there. I do think we'll have a correction, and we have a correction corn here from these price levels. We'll see some strength in the feeder cattle. That would be your opportunity to get some stuff done from August through October, in my opinion. And I will end with that, Greg.
All right. Excuse me. Daryl Holiday with Country Futures in Frankfurt. And obviously they can't get a hold of you now, but if anyone has any questions for either you or Jerry, what's the number they can call?
Oh, let's see. It's 800-292-4038.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah. All right. Daryl, hey, I appreciate it. And as always, great insight to what we're seeing in the markets. And I appreciate you joining us as always.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity.
That is Daryl Holiday with Country Futures in Frankfurt, giving our market presentation here at the 2021 Farm Profit Virtual Seminar.
Welcome to the 2021 Farm Profit Seminar. I'm Brendan Meinhardt.
I'm Grant Meinhardt. In these sessions today, you'll hear from industry experts, from weather to COVID-19 to Daryl Holiday is going to give market updates, just kind of get more in depth on your guys' business.
As part of the next generation here at KanEquip, Grant and I'd like to welcome you into our dealerships. We also believe that education is an important role in what we do here at KanEquip. We feel like sponsoring these events can give you insight into a changing ag world.
We'd like to invite you into any one of our 14 locations across Kansas and one in Nebraska. This is a relationship business and one of the best businesses we can be in today.
And that will do it for our 2021 Farm Profit Virtual Seminar, presented by KanEquip, your local New Holland and Case IH dealer. We want to remind you that you'll be able to watch the videos of the presentations by going to our website, WIBWnewsnow.com. You can also get details on our farmer appreciation dinners coming up during the month of July. And if you registered for the seminar, you've got your invitation already. More details will be coming soon. And we remain optimistic that our appreciation dinners will be in-person events, and are excited to say thank you and appreciation for all of your hard work. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in person for our 2022 Farm Profit Seminars. And as we leave you, our thanks as well to all of our great sponsors. Thank you for joining us on the 2021 Farm Profit Virtual Seminar.